King walks into the cold dungeon of a conquered castle, only to find a sight that stops him in his tracks. A woman breastfeeding a child, defiant and broken, yet filled with dignity. What he does next is not what anyone expected. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The winter wind howled through the stone corridors of Ravenholm Castle, carrying with it the acrid smell of smoke and the distant cries of the defeated. King Edmund Blackstone stood at the battlements, his massive frame silhouetted against the gray sky, watching as the last remnants of resistance crumbled in the valley below. His dark hair, streaked with the silver of his 32 years, whipped around his face as he surveyed the conquered lands of House Riverdale. The thick fur cloak draped across his broad shoulders bore the emblem of his house, a black raven clutching a sword, embroidered in silver thread that caught what little light pierced the heavy clouds above. The war had lasted 3 brutal years. 3 years of bloodshed, strategic maneuvers, and political machinations that had left the northern territories of England scarred and its people weary. House Riverdale, once a proud and formidable ally, had broken their oath of fealty, declaring independence and rallying other houses to their cause. Lord Thomas Riverdale had been a cunning adversary, but ultimately, his ambition had exceeded his wisdom. Now, Ravenholm Castle, the seat of Riverdale power, belonged to King Edmund, and with it, the future of the entire northern realm. Edmund's steel-gray eyes, hard as the stone walls around him, scanned the courtyard below where his soldiers moved with practiced efficiency. They herded prisoners into organized lines, separated the wounded from the dead, and began the grim work of cataloging the spoils of war. His commander, Sir William Darkwater, approached from behind, his armor still bearing the marks of recent combat. Dried blood splattered across the steel plates that covered his chest. "Your Majesty," William said, bowing his head slightly. His voice was rough, worn from shouting commands throughout the day-long siege. "The castle is secured. We've found Lord Thomas in the Great Hall. He chose to end his own life rather than face capture." Edmund's jaw tightened, but he showed no other emotion. "A coward's way out," he said quietly, his deep voice carrying a weight that made even the battle-hardened knight beside him shift uncomfortably. What of his family? His household? William cleared his throat, glancing down at a parchment he held in his gloved hand. The leather of his gauntlets creaked as he adjusted his grip. His wife, Lady Margaret, perished during the initial assault. Their eldest son died defending the Western Tower. We have captured approximately 200 survivors, including servants, lesser nobles, and soldiers who surrendered. They're being processed now in the lower bailey. "And the younger children?" Edmund asked, turning to face his commander fully. The king stood a full head taller than most men, his physique honed by years of training and warfare. His face, though handsome with strong features and a defined jawline, bore the hardness of a man who had made impossible decisions and carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. 2 daughters, ages 9 and 12, found hiding in the sept with the castle's septon. "They're unharmed and under guard in the eastern wing," William reported, his expression softening slightly at the mention of the children. Even in war, there were lines most men hesitated to cross. "There's also a situation in the dungeons, Your Majesty. Something you should see personally." Edmund's eyebrows rose slightly. "What situation?" William hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "One of the prisoners. She's not of House Riverdale, but she was found in their custody. The circumstances are unusual. I believe it would be best if you assessed the matter yourself." The king studied his commander's face for a moment, reading the conflict there. William Darkwater had served him for 15 years, since Edmund had been a young prince, learning the ways of warfare. If the man suggested his personal attention was needed, there was good reason. Edmund nodded once, decisively. "Lead the way." They descended from the battlements, their boots echoing against the stone steps worn smooth by centuries of use. The castle, though now conquered, retained its imposing grandeur. Tapestries depicting the history of House Riverdale still hung on the walls, their colors muted in the dim torchlight. Servants pressed themselves against the walls as the king passed, their eyes downcast, fear evident in every line of their bodies. Edmund paid them little mind. Fear was natural in the aftermath of conquest, but he was not a cruel king. Those who submitted would find mercy, Those who resisted would find justice, swift and final. The dungeons of Ravenholm Castle were extensive, carved deep into the rock upon which the fortress stood. The temperature dropped noticeably as they descended, and the air grew thick with moisture and the unmistakable stench of human suffering. Torches set in iron brackets cast dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls, and the sound of dripping water created an eerie rhythm that echoed through the corridors. "We found her in the lowest level," William explained as they walked past cells containing captured soldiers, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow. "According to the guards we interrogated, she's been here for nearly 8 months. Lord Thomas kept her existence quiet, even from most of his own household." Edmund's interest sharpened. "Who is she?" "That's what makes this complicated, Your Majesty," William said, stopping before a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. 2 of Edmund's personal guards stood watch, straightening immediately at their approach. "She claims to be Lady Rosalind of House Merrick." The name struck Edmund like a physical blow, though he allowed no reaction to show on his face. House Merrick. The memory rose unbidden, sharp and painful despite the passage of years. Lord James Merrick had been his father's most trusted advisor, a man of unwavering loyalty and keen political insight. When Edmund had been just 16, barely more than a boy, Lord James had brought his family to court. Edmund remembered a girl with striking features and intelligent eyes, perhaps 14 at the time, who had moved through the castle with a grace unusual for her age. But that had been nearly 17 years ago, and the Merricks had suffered a terrible fate. "House Merrick felt a plague," Edmund said slowly, his voice controlled but carrying an undercurrent of something darker. 12 years ago, the entire family was lost. I received reports myself. Lord James, his wife, their children, all dead within a fortnight of each other." William nodded grimly. "That's what the official records state, Your Majesty. But this woman bears the Merrick features. She has their distinctive auburn hair, their green eyes, and she knows things, details about the court from your father's time that few would remember." Edmund's mind raced, calculating possibilities and implications. If this woman truly was a Merrick, if she had somehow survived, her very existence raised dangerous questions. Who had falsified the reports of her death? Why? And what had Lord Thomas wanted with her? "Open the door," he commanded. The guards moved immediately, lifting the heavy wooden beam that barred the door and pulling it open with a groan of protesting hinges. The cell beyond was larger than Edmund had expected, perhaps 10 feet square, with a small barred window set high in the wall that allowed a weak shaft of gray daylight to penetrate the gloom. The furnishings were sparse, a rough wooden pallet covered with thin blankets, a bucket in the corner, a small table with a clay pitcher and cup, and in the far corner, pressed against the stone wall, sat a woman holding an infant to her breast. Edmund froze in the doorway, his warrior's instincts momentarily overwhelmed by the unexpected intimacy of the scene. The woman looked up at their entrance, and even in the dim light, he could see the fear that flashed across her face before she mastered it, replacing it with a defiant dignity that struck him as both admirable and heartbreaking. She made no move to cover herself or stop nursing the child, but her arms tightened protectively around the infant. She was beautiful, though clearly suffering from her long imprisonment. Her auburn hair, matted and tangled, fell past her shoulders in waves that might once have shone like burnished copper. Her face was pale, too thin, with high cheekbones that cast shadows in the torchlight, and full lips pressed into a tight line. But it was her eyes that captured Edmund's attention, large and luminous, the color of spring leaves, currently fixed on him with a mixture of defiance and desperation that made something in his chest constrict uncomfortably. She wore a simple dress of rough wool, gray and stained, that had seen better days. The neckline was loose, allowing her to nurse the child easily, and Edmund could see the sharp line of her collarbone, evidence of inadequate nutrition. Yet despite her circumstances, despite the fear he could sense radiating from her, she held herself with an innate grace that spoke of noble breeding. The infant at her breast was tiny, perhaps 3 or 4 months old if Edmund was any judge, though he had limited experience with children. The baby nursed contentedly, oblivious to the tension in the room, one small fist curled against the woman's chest. "Lady Rosalind Merrick," Edmund said finally, his voice carefully neutral. He stepped fully into the cell and William followed, positioning himself by the door. If that is indeed who you are. The woman's chin lifted slightly, a gesture of pride that reminded Edmund suddenly and powerfully of her father. Lord James had possessed that same quality, that ability to maintain dignity even in the most dire circumstances. I am Rosalind Merrick, daughter of Lord James Merrick, sworn vassal to your father, King Richard Blackstone. May he rest in peace. I stand before you now, your majesty, though I never expected to see this day. Her voice was refined, educated, carrying the accent of the capital city despite years of imprisonment. There was a slight tremor in it that she couldn't quite suppress, but her words were clear and measured. Edmund found himself studying her face, searching for the girl he had briefly known so many years ago. The features were right, the coloring matched his memories, but 17 years and obvious suffering had transformed that girl into this woman. The records state that you died 12 years ago, Edmund said, taking another step closer. He was careful to keep his movements slow and non-threatening, recognizing that she was like a cornered animal, dangerous in her desperation to protect her child. That the plague took your entire family. A bitter smile touched Rosalind's lips, transforming her face for a moment into something both beautiful and terrible. The plague took my parents and my younger brother. That much is true. But I survived, though there were times in the years since when I wished I had not. The reports of my death were convenient for those who found another use for the last of House Merrick. Explain, Edmund commanded, though his tone was not harsh. He found himself genuinely curious, and more disturbed than he cared to admit by the story unfolding before him. Rosalind shifted slightly, adjusting the infant's position with practiced ease before continuing. Her eyes never left Edmund's face, gauging his reactions, searching for any hint of whether he might be salvation or simply another threat. When the plague came, I was 18. My family fell sick within days of each other. I tended them, watched them die, and waited for the fever to claim me as well. But I was spared. Lord Reginald Thornfield, who held lands adjacent to ours, arrived after their deaths. He said he had come to help arrange the burials and manage the estate until your father could determine its disposition. Edmund's jaw clenched. He remembered Thornfield, a minor lord with ambitions that had always seemed to exceed his station. Continue. Instead of help, he brought chains, Rosalind said, her voice dropping lower, rougher, with remembered pain. He claimed that with my family dead, my lands would revert to the crown, and he had been granted stewardship. But he wanted more than lands. He wanted me. He kept me prisoner in my own home for 2 years, and when I continued to refuse his advances, when it became clear I would never willingly marry him and legitimize his claim, he sold me. The words hung in the air like poison. William inhaled sharply, his hand moving instinctively to his sword hilt. Edmund felt cold rage building in his chest, the kind of anger that had made him feared on the battlefield. Sold you, he repeated, his voice deadly quiet. Rosalind nodded, her arms tightening around her son. To a merchant heading north. I was transported like cargo, passed from hand to hand over the next several years. Some of my captors were merely cruel, others were worse. 8 months ago, I ended up here, purchased by Lord Thomas Riverdale for reasons he never fully explained. He kept me in these dungeons, but he did not harm me as others had. He was preoccupied with his rebellion, and I think he saw me as a political asset he might use someday against your crown. And the child? Edmund asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The question came out harsher than he intended, and he saw Rosalind flinch slightly. Her eyes dropped to the infant at her breast, and her expression softened with a love so fierce it was almost painful to witness. My son, Thomas. He is 4 months old. His father was a guard here, a man who showed me kindness in this darkness. He was killed 3 weeks ago during one of your assaults on the outer defenses. Her voice broke slightly on the last words, and she took a moment to compose herself before meeting Edmund's gaze again. He was a good man, the only good man I have known in 12 years. Edmund stood silent, processing everything he had heard. His mind, trained in strategy and politics, was already working through the implications. If Rosalind's story was true, and he had no reason yet to doubt it, she had been grievously wronged, first by Thornfield, then by a succession of men who should have protected her instead of exploiting her vulnerability. Her very existence was an indictment of the failures of his father's reign and, by extension, his own inability to maintain order throughout the realm. But beyond the political considerations, beyond the questions of justice and retribution that would need to be addressed, Edmund found himself moved by something more fundamental. This woman had survived horrors that would have broken most people. She had endured captivity, abuse, and loss, yet she sat before him nursing her son with a dignity that spoke of unbreakable spirit. She had not begged, had not wept, had not prostrated herself before his power. Instead, she had simply told her truth and waited to see what he would do with it. "Lord Thornfield died 7 years ago," Edmund said finally. "Fever took him, supposedly. His son holds the lands now. Then perhaps there is some justice in the world after all," Rosalind said quietly. "Though it came too late for me." Edmund made a decision, one that surprised even himself. "You will be removed from this cell immediately. You and your son will be given quarters in the castle proper, suitable to your station as a lady of noble birth. You will be provided with servants, clothing, food, everything you need for your comfort and recovery." Rosalind stared at King Edmund in disbelief, her green eyes widening as she processed his words. For a moment she seemed unable to speak, her lips parting slightly as if to form words that wouldn't come. The infant at her breast had finished nursing and now dozed contentedly, his tiny features relaxed in sleep. She carefully adjusted her dress to cover herself, her movements slow and deliberate, as though afraid any sudden motion might shatter whatever strange mercy had just been extended to her. "Your Majesty," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't understand. Why would you show such kindness to a prisoner, to someone who was held by your enemy?" Edmund's expression remained unreadable, his steel-gray eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. Yet she found she could not. There was something in his gaze that went beyond mere authority or power. It was as if he was truly seeing her, not just as a prisoner or a problem to be solved, but as a person who had suffered unjustly. "Because you are not responsible for the crimes of those who held you captive," he said, his deep voice filling the small cell. "Because your father served mine with honor and loyalty, and that service deserves to be remembered. And because no woman should be forced to raise her child in a dungeon when I have the power to change that circumstance." He turned to William, who had been watching the exchange with visible surprise. The commander's weathered face showed a mixture of approval and concern, clearly understanding that his king was making a decision that would have political ramifications. "Sir William, arrange for Lady Rosalind and her son to be moved to the guest chambers in the North Tower. I want guards posted, but they are for her protection, not her imprisonment. Make that absolutely clear to the men. Anyone who treats her with anything less than the respect due to a lady of noble birth will answer to me personally." William bowed immediately. "Of course, Your Majesty. I'll see to it at once." He paused, then added carefully, "Should I also arrange for a physician to examine her and the child? They may need medical attention after their confinement." "Yes," Edmund said, nodding approval. "Send for Brother Aldrich. He's the best healer in my service, and he's discreet. I also want a woman of good character assigned to assist Lady Rosalind, someone who can serve as both attendant and companion. She'll need help caring for the child and adjusting to freedom after so long in captivity." Rosalind listened to these arrangements being made with a sense of unreality washing over her. After 12 years of being treated as property, as something less than human, this sudden reversal felt like a dream from which she might wake at any moment. She looked down at her son, his small face peaceful in sleep, and felt tears prick at her eyes. For him, at least, there would be warmth and safety, proper food and clean blankets. Whatever happened to her, whatever price she might eventually have to pay for this unexpected mercy, it was worth it if Thomas could have even a few days of comfort. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion she could no longer suppress. A single tear escaped, trailing down her pale cheek. "I have nothing to offer in return for such generosity. I am a woman with no lands, no wealth, no family to speak for me. I can promise you nothing except my gratitude, which I know is poor recompense for what you're giving me and my son." Edmund stepped closer, close enough that Rosalind could see the fine details of his face in the torchlight. Up close, he was even more imposing than she had first realized. His features were strong and masculine, with a square jaw darkened by stubble and a straight nose that had clearly been broken at least once. But there was also an unexpected kindness in his eyes as he looked at her, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his warrior's bearing. "You owe me no debt, Lady Rosalind. If anything, it is the crown that owes a debt to you." You should have been protected after your family's death. Instead, you were betrayed and abandoned. That failure stains my father's legacy and my own. The least I can do is ensure your safety now." He gestured toward the door, where William was already issuing orders to the guards waiting outside. "Come, let's get you out of this place. You've spent more than enough time in darkness." Rosalind stood slowly, her legs trembling slightly from the effort. She had been confined for so long that even simple movements felt awkward and uncertain. She clutched Thomas to her chest, wrapping the thin blanket around him more securely as a cold draft swept through the cell. Edmund noticed her unsteadiness and instinctively reached out to offer support, his large hand hovering near her elbow without actually touching her, giving her the choice of whether to accept his assistance. She hesitated for only a moment before placing her free hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength of muscle beneath the rich fabric of his tunic. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, something she hadn't felt in so long that it took her a moment to identify it as simple human connection, the touch of someone offering help rather than demanding submission. Edmund's arm was steady as stone, and she leaned on it gratefully as they made their way out of the cell. The corridor outside seemed brighter than Rosalind remembered, though in truth it was still dim and oppressive. Guards lined the walls, their expressions carefully neutral as the king passed with the prisoner who was apparently no longer a prisoner. She could feel their curious gazes following her, and she straightened her spine, calling upon reserves of dignity she had thought long exhausted. She was Lady Rosalind Merrick, daughter of a house that had served the crown with distinction. She had survived 12 years of hell. She would not show weakness now, not in front of these men who might still see her as something to be exploited. As they climbed the stairs leading up from the dungeons, Rosalind felt as though she was ascending from the underworld itself. Each step took her farther from the darkness that had been her prison, and with each step, she dared to hope a little more. Thomas stirred against her chest, making small noises in his sleep, and she murmured soothing nonsense to him, the same sound she had whispered in the darkness to help him sleep when the cold bit deep and her own fear threatened to overwhelm her. Edmund walked beside her, matching his pace to hers, never rushing or showing impatience at her slowness. William followed a few steps behind, and behind him came 2 guards, their armor clinking softly with each step. The procession made its way through the castle corridors, and Rosalind took in her surroundings with hungry eyes. She had seen so little beyond the walls of her cell in the past 8 months. The tapestries, the carved stone pillars, the high windows that let in natural light, all of it felt almost overwhelming after so long in darkness. They passed servants who stopped their work to bow as the king passed. Some of them stared openly at Rosalind, clearly wondering who this ragged woman was and why the king himself was escorting her through the castle. She could imagine the rumors that would spread through Ravenholm by nightfall, the speculation and gossip that would follow in her wake. But she found that she didn't care. Let them talk. She was alive. Her son was alive, and they were being offered a chance at something better than the existence they had endured. The North Tower proved to be in a section of the castle that had clearly been reserved for important guests. The corridor was wider here, the walls decorated with fine tapestries depicting hunting scenes and historical battles. Thick carpets muffled their footsteps, and brass sconces held torches that burned with clean flames, filling the air with the scent of beeswax rather than the acrid smoke of cheap tallow. Edmund led her to a heavy oak door carved with intricate patterns of leaves and vines. These chambers belonged to Lord Thomas's aunt before she passed 2 years ago, Edmund explained as he pushed the door open. They've been maintained but unused since then. They should serve your needs adequately. Adequately was a severe understatement. Rosalind stepped into the room and felt her breath catch in her throat. The chamber was spacious and well appointed, with a large bed draped in thick furs and wool blankets. A fireplace dominated one wall, currently cold but laid with wood ready to be lit. Windows overlooked the courtyard below, with heavy curtains that could be drawn for privacy. There was a sitting area with comfortable chairs, a table suitable for dining, and a wardrobe that stood open to reveal empty shelves waiting to be filled. But what caught Rosalind's attention most was the smaller room visible through an open doorway. She moved toward it as if pulled by invisible strings, and found herself looking into a nursery. A cradle sat near the window, beautifully carved and lined with soft blankets. There were shelves for storing baby clothes and supplies, a comfortable chair for nursing, even a small chest for toys that Thomas would be too young to use for months yet. But that represented a future Rosalind had barely dared to imagine. "I thought you might appreciate having a separate space for the child," Edmund said from behind her. He had followed her to the doorway and now stood watching her reaction with something that might have been satisfaction. "Children can be loud. I'm told having a dedicated nursery helps." Rosalind turned to face him, and this time she couldn't stop the tears that spilled down her cheeks. They came in a flood, all the pain and fear and desperate hope of the past months and years overwhelming her defenses. She had thought herself beyond tears, had believed she had cried herself dry in the darkness of her cell. But standing in this beautiful room, holding her son and looking at a cradle that promised safety and comfort, she found that she had underestimated her own capacity for emotion. "I'm sorry," she gasped, trying futilely to wipe away the tears with one hand while still clutching Thomas with the other. "I don't mean to be weak. It's so much. Too much. I don't know how to process this kindness after so long without it." Edmund's expression softened further, and he moved closer, though he maintained a respectful distance. "You're not weak, Lady Rosalind. Tears after what you've endured don't indicate weakness. They indicate that you're still human, still capable of feeling hope. That's a strength many would have lost in your circumstances." He reached into a pocket in his tunic and withdrew a clean cloth, offering it to her. She took it gratefully, using it to dab at her face while trying to regain her composure. Thomas, disturbed by his mother's emotional outburst, began to fuss, his small face scrunching up in preparation for a cry. Rosalind immediately shifted her attention to him, bouncing him gently and making soothing sounds until he settled again. "You're good with him," Edmund observed, watching the easy way she calmed the infant. "Natural. I have to be," Rosalind said with a wan smile. "He has only me. I've been mother, nurse, and protector since the moment he was born. There was no one else to help, no midwife or wet nurse. Just me in that cell, trying to keep him alive and warm and fed." She looked down at her son's face, tracing his features with her eyes. "He looks like his father. Same dark hair, same shape to his eyes. I'm glad of that. At least he'll have something of the man who gave me hope when I had none left." Edmund was silent for a moment, and when Rosalind looked up at him, she found his expression troubled. "This guard who fathered your son, tell me about him. What was his name?" "Jonathan," Rosalind said softly, her voice carrying the weight of grief still fresh despite the weeks that had passed since his death. "Jonathan Rivers. He was from a small village near the coast, the youngest of 5 sons. He came to serve Lord Thomas because there was no inheritance for him at home, and he needed to make his own way in the world. He was kind to me from the first day he was assigned to bring me food. He would talk to me, tell me about the world outside my cell. He brought me extra blankets when the cold was worst, and he never once looked at me with cruelty or lust in his eyes." She paused, lost in memory. It took months before I trusted him enough to speak more than a few words. Years of captivity had taught me that kindness was often a prelude to demands for payment. But Jonathan never demanded anything. He simply kept being kind, kept treating me as a person rather than a thing. Eventually, I found myself looking forward to his visits. He was light in the darkness, hope when I had none. "And he loved you," Edmund said. It wasn't a question. Rosalind nodded. "Yes, and I loved him. Perhaps it wasn't the grand romance of songs and stories. Perhaps it was born more of desperation and proximity than anything else. But it was real, and it was precious to me. When I discovered I was carrying his child, I was terrified. Bringing a baby into that cell, into those circumstances, seemed like the cruelest fate imaginable. But Jonathan was overjoyed. He promised me that he would find a way to get us out, that he would save enough coin to buy my freedom, or convince Lord Thomas to release me. He had plans, dreams for our future." Her voice broke and she had to pause to collect herself. "He died before any of those dreams could come true. An arrow through the throat during a night raid. They brought his body back and I wasn't even allowed to say goodbye properly. They took him away, and I never learned where they buried him. So I named our son after him, so that some part of Jonathan Rivers would live on in this world." Edmund's hands had clenched into fists at his sides as she spoke, his jaw tight with an anger that was clearly directed not at her, but at the circumstances that had led to such suffering. "I'm sorry," he said, and the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. "I'm sorry for your loss. and I'm sorry that a good man died in a war that need never have happened. If Lord Thomas had kept his oath, if there is anything I can do to honor Jonathan's memory, you need only ask." Rosalind looked at him with surprise. "You would honor the memory of an enemy soldier, a man who fought against you? I would honor the memory of a man who showed kindness and decency in circumstances where many would not have," Edmund corrected. "Soldiers fight for their lords, not always because they believe in the cause, but because duty and survival demand it. If this Jonathan was as good a man as you say, then his death is a loss regardless of which banner he fought under." Before Rosalind could respond, a knock sounded at the door. William entered at Edmund's call, followed by a procession of servants carrying various items. There were buckets of steaming water for washing, clean linens, a tray laden with food, and several bundles that Rosalind assumed contained clothing. Behind them came an elderly man in simple but clean robes, carrying a leather satchel that marked him as a physician. "Brother Aldrich," Edmund said, gesturing the man forward. "Thank you for coming so quickly. This is Lady Rosalind Merrick and her son Thomas. They've been held in poor conditions and may need medical attention." Brother Aldrich was perhaps 60 years old, with a kind face weathered by years of service and gentle eyes that took in Rosalind's condition, with professional assessment but no judgment. He bowed respectfully to her, treating her with the courtesy due to her rank despite her ragged appearance. "My lady, I am at your service. With your permission, I would like to examine both you and the child to ensure you're both in good health." Rosalind felt a moment of instinctive fear. She had learned to be wary of men, even those who seemed harmless. But something in Brother Aldrich's demeanor reassured her, and she found herself nodding. "Yes, please. I want to make sure Thomas is healthy. He was born in that cell with no proper care. I've worried every day that something might be wrong with him." "Then let us ease those worries," Brother Aldrich said with a warm smile. He turned to Edmund. "Your Majesty, perhaps it would be best if the lady had some privacy for the examination. I assure you I will provide a full report on their condition once I'm finished." Edmund nodded immediately. "Of course, Lady Rosalind, I'll leave you in Brother Aldrich's capable hands. The servants will help you get settled. If you need anything at all, inform the guards outside and they will see that you get it. I'll return this evening to check on your welfare." He bowed to her, a gesture of respect that shocked Rosalind more than anything else that had happened. A king bowing to her, a woman with nothing. It seemed impossible, yet it had just occurred before her eyes. She found herself curtsying awkwardly in return, hindered by the infant in her arms and her own weakened state. Edmund left the chamber with William following close behind, and as the door closed, Rosalind felt both relief and an unexpected sense of loss. The king's presence had been overwhelming, but there had also been something reassuring about his solid strength and the authority he wielded so naturally. She shook her head slightly, dismissing the thought. She had more immediate concerns than analyzing her reactions to King Edmund Blackstone. Brother Aldrich moved about the room with quiet efficiency, directing the servants to prepare a warm bath in the adjoining bathing chamber and to lay out the food on the table. Once the servants had completed their tasks and departed, he turned his full attention to Rosalind. "Now then, my lady, let us begin with the little one. May I?" He held out his hands, and after a moment's hesitation, Rosalind carefully transferred Thomas into his care. The physician handled the infant with practiced gentleness, his weathered hands surprisingly deft as he unwrapped the thin blanket and began his examination. He checked Thomas's eyes, ears, and mouth, felt along his limbs and torso, listened to his breathing. Throughout the process, he maintained a running commentary, explaining what he was looking for and reassuring Rosalind that everything appeared normal and healthy. "He's underweight," Brother Aldrich said after several minutes of careful examination, "but not dangerously so. His lungs are clear, his reflexes are good, and his color is better than I expected given the conditions you've described. You've done remarkably well caring for him, my lady. Many infants born in such circumstances would not have survived." Rosalind felt a wave of relief so intense it made her dizzy. She had spent countless hours in the darkness of her cell, worrying that she was failing her son, that her inadequate nutrition and the cold, damp environment were harming him in ways she couldn't see. Hearing that he was fundamentally healthy despite everything felt like a weight being lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. "I tried so hard to keep him safe, to give him everything I could, but I was never sure if it was enough." "It was more than enough," Brother Aldrich assured her, rewrapping Thomas in his blanket and handing him back to his mother. You kept him alive and thriving under conditions that would challenge even the most experienced mother with all the resources in the world. That speaks to both your love for him and your remarkable resilience. He gestured to one of the chairs. Now, if you'll sit, I'd like to examine you as well. I need to check for any injuries or illnesses that might require treatment. I promise to be as quick and respectful as possible. Rosalind sat, still holding Thomas, and allowed the physician to conduct his examination. He checked her eyes and teeth, felt for fever, examined her hands and wrists for signs of injury or infection. His face remained professionally neutral throughout, but she could see the concern that flickered in his eyes as he noted the marks left by shackles, the evidence of malnutrition, the toll that years of captivity had taken on her body. "You're severely malnourished," he said finally, his tone gentle but frank. "Your body has been depleting its own resources to produce milk for the child, which is admirable but unsustainable. We need to get proper food into you immediately. I'm going to prepare a tonic that will help restore your strength, and I'll instruct the kitchen to provide you with specific meals designed to rebuild your health." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "I also see evidence of old injuries, my lady. Injuries that were never properly treated. I can provide salves for the scars, though I'm afraid some of them will never fully fade. And I want you to understand that if you need to speak with someone about what you've endured, about the trauma of your captivity, I am available. Sometimes the wounds we cannot see are the ones that need the most care." Rosalind felt her throat tighten with emotion again. The kindness in his offer, the recognition that her suffering had been about more than just physical deprivation, touched something deep within her. "Thank you, Brother Aldrich. I may take you up on that offer in time. Right now, I'm still trying to believe that this is real, that I'm not going to wake up back in that cell." "It's real, my lady," he said firmly. "And King Edmund has given explicit orders that you are to be treated with respect and provided with everything you need. He's a man of his word. If he says you're under his protection, then you are safe." He spent the next hour preparing various remedies, explaining each one's purpose as he worked. There was a tonic to help restore her strength, a salve for her scarred wrists, a tea to help her sleep without nightmares. He left detailed instructions for the servants about her care and made her promise to send for him immediately if she or Thomas showed any signs of illness. After he departed, Rosalind found herself alone in the chamber for the first time since being freed from the dungeon. The silence was almost overwhelming after months of hearing the constant sounds of the prison, the guards' footsteps, the moans of other prisoners, the drip of water against stone. Here, there was only the crackling of the fire that had been lit in the hearth and Thomas's soft breathing as he slept in her arms. She looked down at her son, marveling at how peaceful he seemed. In the dungeon, he had cried often, disturbed by the cold and the oppressive atmosphere. Here, wrapped in warm blankets and surrounded by comfort, he slept deeply. It reinforced the rightness of accepting King Edmund's offer, regardless of what complications it might bring. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "My lady?" a woman's voice called. "May I enter?" "Yes, please come in," Rosalind responded, shifting Thomas in her arms. The door opened to admit a woman of perhaps 40 years, with graying brown hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. She wore a simple but well-made dress of dark blue wool, and she carried a large basket over one arm. She curtsied respectfully upon entering. "My lady, I am Beatrice Ashford. King Edmund has asked me to serve as your attendant and companion. I've spent many years in service to noble households, and I hope I can be of assistance to you and your son." Rosalind felt relief wash over her. The prospect of navigating this new situation alone had been daunting. Having another woman, someone who seemed both competent and kind, felt like another unexpected blessing. "Thank you, Beatrice. I'm grateful for your help. I must confess, I'm somewhat overwhelmed by all of this. A few hours ago, I was in a dungeon cell. Now I'm in chambers fit for a princess, being offered every comfort. It feels like a dream." Beatrice smiled warmly. "I can only imagine how strange this must be for you, my lady, but I assure you it's quite real." His Majesty was very clear about his expectations. "You are to be treated with the utmost respect and provided with everything you need." She set her basket down on the table and began unpacking it, revealing an array of baby clothes, soft blankets, and various supplies for infant care. "I took the liberty of gathering these items from the castle stores," she explained. Lord Thomas's daughters had children who visited occasionally, so there are quite a few baby things available. I thought you might need them for little Thomas here. Rosalind watched as Beatrice laid out tiny garments, each one clean and whole, free from the stains and wear of the ragged cloth she had been wrapping her son in. There were soft wool blankets, cotton gowns, even tiny caps to keep his head warm. The abundance of it all made her chest ache with gratitude. "This is too much," she whispered. "I don't deserve all of this." Beatrice turned to her with a stern expression that somehow managed to remain kind. "My lady, if I may speak frankly, from what I understand of your circumstances, you deserve far more than this. You've survived things that would have broken most people. You've kept your son alive under impossible conditions. You deserve every comfort we can provide, and more besides." She moved to Rosalind's side, gently touching her shoulder. "Now, I've had a bath prepared in the next room. The water is still warm, and I've added herbs that will soothe your skin and help you relax. Why don't I take young Thomas for a bit while you bathe and refresh yourself? I have 6 children of my own, all grown now, so I promise you he'll be in good hands." Rosalind's first instinct was to refuse. She hadn't been separated from Thomas for more than a few minutes since his birth, and the thought of letting him out of her sight filled her with anxiety. But she also recognized that she desperately needed to wash away the grime of captivity, and Beatrice's experience with children was evident in the confident way she spoke. "All right," she said slowly, "but if he cries, I'll bring him to you immediately," Beatrice promised. "He's just eaten and he's sleeping soundly. This is the perfect time for you to care for yourself, my lady." Carefully, reluctantly, Rosalind transferred her son into Beatrice's waiting arms. The older woman took him with practiced ease, cradling him against her shoulder and humming softly. Thomas didn't even stir, remaining deeply asleep. Rosalind watched for a moment, fighting the urge to snatch him back, before forcing herself to turn toward the bathing chamber. The bath was everything Beatrice had promised. The large wooden tub was filled with steaming water, and the air was fragrant with lavender and chamomile. Clean cloths were laid out beside the tub, along with a bar of soap that smelled of honey and herbs. Rosalind stood at the edge of the tub for a long moment, simply staring at the water as if it might disappear if she looked away. Then, with trembling hands, she began to remove her filthy dress. The fabric was stiff with dirt and stains, and she had to struggle with some of the fastenings. When she finally stood naked, she caught sight of herself in a polished bronze mirror hanging on the wall, and she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She was too thin, her ribs visible beneath pale skin. Bruises in various stages of healing marked her body, along with scars from old injuries. Her hair hung in tangled ropes past her shoulders, more brown than auburn from accumulated grime. But it was her eyes that shocked her most. They looked ancient, haunted, the eyes of someone who had seen too much suffering. She turned away from the mirror and stepped into the bath. The hot water enveloped her like an embrace, and she sank down until it covered her shoulders. For a moment, the heat was almost painful against her cold skin, but then her body adjusted, and she felt muscles she hadn't even realized were tense begin to relax. She washed methodically, scrubbing away months of grime, watching the water turn gray and then brown as she cleaned herself. She washed her hair 3 times, working out the tangles as gently as she could, using her fingers to comb through the knots. With each layer of dirt she removed, she felt as though she was washing away some of the trauma of her captivity, though she knew the emotional scars would take far longer to heal than the physical ones. By the time she emerged from the bath, the water had gone cold, and she had scrubbed her skin nearly raw. But she felt more human than she had in months. Beatrice had laid out clean clothes for her, a simple but well-made dress of soft gray wool with a white shift to wear beneath it. There were stockings, proper shoes instead of the broken slippers she had been wearing, and even a warm shawl. Rosalind dressed slowly, marveling at the feel of clean fabric against her skin. The dress fit reasonably well, though it was slightly loose, evidence of how much weight she had lost. She emerged from the bathing chamber to find Beatrice sitting in one of the chairs, still holding Thomas, who continued to sleep peacefully. "Oh, my lady," Beatrice said softly, her eyes widening as she took in Rosalind's transformed appearance. "You're absolutely beautiful. I can see the resemblance to your father now. You have his coloring and his features. I remember Lord James from when he visited court. He was a good man, respected by all." Rosalind felt a pang of grief at the mention of her father. It had been so long since anyone had spoken of him with respect and affection. "You knew him?" "Only slightly," Beatrice admitted. "I was in service at the royal court during King Richard's reign. I saw Lord James many times, though I never spoke with him directly. But everyone knew of his wisdom and loyalty. He was one of King Richard's most trusted advisors." She paused, then added gently, "I was sorry to hear of the plague that took your family. It was a great loss to the realm." "Thank you," Rosalind said quietly. She moved to the table where the food Brother Aldrich had ordered still waited. Her stomach growled audibly at the sight of it. Bread, cheese, cold meat, fruit, and a thick soup that had been kept warm over a small brazier. She couldn't remember the last time she had seen such abundance of food. "Please eat," Beatrice encouraged. "You need to rebuild your strength. I'll watch over Thomas." Rosalind sat and began to eat, trying not to simply wolf down the food despite her ravenous hunger. The bread was fresh and soft, nothing like the stale, moldy scraps she had been given in the dungeon. The cheese was rich and creamy, the meat tender and flavorful. She had to force herself to eat slowly, knowing that her stomach, accustomed to near starvation, might rebel if she ate too much too quickly. As she ate, Beatrice talked, filling the silence with gentle conversation about the castle, about the household routines, about practical matters that Rosalind would need to know. It was clear that the older woman understood what Rosalind needed: normalcy, routine, a sense of returning to a world where people had ordinary conversations about ordinary things. "King Edmund has ordered that you be provided with a full wardrobe," Beatrice was saying. "The castle seamstresses are already at work. They'll need to take your measurements, of course, but they're using Lady Margaret's old dresses as a starting point. She was about your height, though you're thinner than she was. We should have proper clothes for you within a few days." The afternoon light was beginning to fade when King Edmund returned to Rosalind's chambers, just as he had promised. His knock was firm but not aggressive, and when Beatrice opened the door to admit him, he found a scene that was remarkably different from what he had witnessed in the dungeon hours earlier. Rosalind sat in one of the chairs near the fire, her clean auburn hair gleaming in the firelight as it dried, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She wore the gray dress Beatrice had provided, and though she was still far too thin, the transformation was remarkable. She looked like the lady she was born to be rather than the prisoner she had been forced to become. Thomas lay in the carved cradle, awake now and making soft cooing sounds as he looked around at his new surroundings with wide, curious eyes. Beatrice was folding baby clothes and placing them in the chest, humming softly as she worked. The entire scene radiated a peace and domesticity that seemed almost miraculous given the circumstances. Rosalind rose immediately when Edmund entered, and Beatrice curtsied deeply before excusing herself to give them privacy. Though Edmund noticed, she didn't go far, remaining just outside the door where she could be summoned if needed. He appreciated her discretion and her protective instinct toward her new charge. "Your Majesty," Rosalind said, her voice steady though Edmund could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "Thank you for returning, and thank you for everything you've done for us today. I still don't have adequate words to express my gratitude." Edmund moved into the room, his eyes taking in the details, ensuring that his orders had been carried out properly. The fire was burning well, providing warmth against the evening chill. The remains of a meal sat on the table, evidence that Rosalind had eaten. Most importantly, both mother and child looked healthier and more at peace than they had in the dungeon. "You look much improved, Lady Rosalind. I trust Brother Aldrich's examination found nothing of serious concern." "He was very thorough and very kind," Rosalind replied. "He said that Thomas is healthy, just underweight, and that I need to focus on rebuilding my own strength. He left tonics and salves, and he gave Beatrice detailed instructions about my care." She paused, then added softly, "I still cannot quite believe this is real. That I'm standing here, clean and warm and safe, having a civilized conversation, rather than huddling in a cell trying to keep my son from freezing." Edmund's expression darkened slightly at the reminder of her recent suffering. "I've spent the afternoon making inquiries about your case," he said, his tone becoming more businesslike. "I wanted to understand fully what happened to you and your family. I've spoken with some of my older advisors, men who served my father and who remember Lord James Merrick." Rosalind's breath caught. "And what did they tell you?" "They confirmed your identity," Edmund said, moving to stand near the fire, where he could see her face clearly in the flickering light. Lord James was indeed highly respected, exactly as you described. His death and the reported deaths of his entire family were recorded as plague victims 12 years ago. But now I have to question whether those reports were accurate or if they were deliberately falsified to cover up what really happened to you. He pulled a rolled parchment from his belt and unrolled it, scanning the contents. I've also sent riders to the lands that once belonged to House Merrick. I want to investigate Lord Reginald Thornfield's role in your captivity and determine if his son had any knowledge of his father's crimes. If young Thornfield inherited his lands through fraud and force, that needs to be addressed. Rosalind's hand went to her throat, her green eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. You would do that? Investigate something that happened so many years ago? Why would you invest so much effort in righting wrongs done to someone as insignificant as me? Edmund looked at her directly, his steel-gray eyes intense. You are not insignificant, Lady Rosalind. You are the last surviving member of a house that served my father loyally. You were wronged by men who should have protected you. And beyond all of that, you are a human being who deserves justice. I am king. If I cannot ensure justice for the people of my realm, then what purpose does my crown serve? The passion in his voice surprised even himself. He had made many decisions as king, dispensed justice in countless cases, but there was something about Rosalind's situation that affected him more deeply than he cared to examine too closely. Perhaps it was the echo of his own failure to protect her all those years ago, when he had been too young and too inexperienced to question the reports of her death. Perhaps it was the waste of it all, 12 years of suffering that could have been prevented if someone had simply looked more closely, asked more questions, cared enough to verify the truth. Rosalind was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. There was gratitude there, certainly, but also something else. A tentative hope, perhaps, or the beginning of trust that had been so brutally betrayed by others that she was afraid to feel it again. I don't know what to say, she whispered. No one has cared about what happened to me for so long. I had begun to believe that I truly was insignificant, that my suffering didn't matter to anyone. It matters, Edmund said firmly, and I will see that those responsible are held accountable. He paused, then added in a gentler tone, but for now your focus should be on recovering your strength and caring for your son. The investigation will take time. Riders will need to travel. Records will need to be examined. Witnesses will need to be questioned. In the meantime, you have my protection and my word that you will be safe here. A soft cry from the cradle interrupted their conversation. Thomas had apparently decided he was done observing his surroundings and wanted attention. Rosalind moved immediately to the cradle, lifting her son with the practiced ease of constant care. She held him against her shoulder, bouncing gently and murmuring soothing sounds. Edmund watched the interaction with fascination. He had limited experience with infants. As king, he was usually kept far from the nurseries where royal children were raised by nurses and tutors. Watching Rosalind with her son, seeing the pure love and devotion in her face as she comforted him, stirred something in Edmund that he hadn't expected. She had been through hell, had every reason to be bitter and broken, yet she could still show such tenderness, such complete and selfless love. May I? He asked, surprising himself with the request. I've had little experience with children, and I find myself curious about your son. Rosalind looked surprised but pleased. Of course, Your Majesty. She adjusted Thomas so that Edmund could see him better, moving closer to the king. He's usually quite calm, especially after he's been fed. I think the warmth and safety of this room has done him good. He seems more content than I've ever seen him. Edmund looked down at the infant in Rosalind's arms. Thomas had stopped crying and was now regarding the king with solemn dark eyes that did indeed resemble his father's, from what Edmund could tell. The baby's face was round and soft, with the indefinable features of early infancy, but there was an alertness in his gaze that suggested intelligence. His tiny fist had worked its way out of his blanket and was waving randomly in the air. He's so small, Edmund observed, reaching out carefully to let the infant's fingers close around his own much larger finger. Thomas gripped with surprising strength, and Edmund felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest. But strong. He has a good grip. Rosalind smiled, and the expression transformed her face, making her look younger and revealing a glimpse of the girl she must have been before tragedy struck. Jonathan used to say the same thing. He was so proud of Thomas, even though he knew his son would never bear his name, would never be acknowledged as his heir. He didn't care about any of that. He just loved him. The mention of Jonathan brought a shadow back to Rosalind's face, and Edmund felt an unexpected surge of emotion that he recognized, with some discomfort, as jealousy. Not jealousy of the man himself, who had clearly been decent and kind, but jealousy of the love Rosalind had felt for him, the connection they had shared. It was an absurd reaction, Edmund told himself sternly. He had known this woman for mere hours. He had no claim on her affections, no right to feel anything beyond the duty of a king to protect his subject. Yet he could not deny that something about Rosalind Merrick affected him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Perhaps it was her strength in the face of unimaginable adversity. Perhaps it was the contrast between her suffering and her dignity. Perhaps it was simply that she was a beautiful woman, and he was a man who had spent too many years focused solely on warfare and politics, neglecting the personal aspects of his life. Whatever the reason, he found himself drawn to her in a way that was both exhilarating and deeply uncomfortable. "I should let you rest," Edmund said, gently extracting his finger from Thomas's grip. "You've had an exhausting day, and you need to rebuild your strength. But before I go, I want to discuss your future with you, at least in the immediate term." Rosalind's expression became guarded again, the wariness of someone who had learned that discussions of her future rarely led anywhere good. "What about my future, Your Majesty?" Edmund chose his words carefully, aware that what he was about to propose might seem strange or even threatening to her. "I cannot leave you here at Ravenholm indefinitely. I need to return to my capital within the next few days to address matters of state that have been neglected during the campaign. I would like you and Thomas to come with me, to be housed at the royal castle under my direct protection while we investigate what happened to you and determine how best to restore your position." He saw her stiffen, saw the flash of fear in her eyes, and he understood immediately what she was thinking. She had been promised protection before, had been told she would be cared for, only to find herself passed from one captor to another. "I am not asking you to be my prisoner," he said quickly, firmly. "You would have your own chambers, your own household. Beatrice would come with you if she's willing, and you would be free to move about the castle as you wished. You would be my guest, under my protection. Nothing more." "Nothing more," Rosalind repeated softly, and Edmund could hear the skepticism in her voice. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, but I have learned to be cautious about the promises men make. You say I would be your guest, but what would be expected of me in return for this hospitality? Men rarely give without expecting something in return." Edmund felt a flash of anger, not at her, but at the men who had taught her to think this way, who had taken her trust and innocence and crushed them so thoroughly that she could no longer accept kindness at face value. "I expect nothing from you except that you allow me to help restore the justice that was denied to you. I am not asking for your companionship, your service, or anything else that you might fear. You are a lady of noble birth who has been grievously wronged. I am your king, and it is my duty to protect you and seek justice on your behalf. That is the beginning and end of my expectations." He took a step closer, his voice becoming more intense. "Lady Rosalind, I understand your wariness. I understand that you have every reason to distrust the words of men, especially men with power. But I am giving you my word, not just as a king but as a man of honor, that you will be safe under my protection. If at any point you feel uncomfortable or threatened, you have only to say so, and other arrangements will be made. But I believe that the capital is the best place for you right now. It's where the records are kept, where the people who might remember your family can be found, where we have the best chance of unraveling what happened and making it right." Rosalind was silent for a long moment, looking down at her son as if seeking wisdom in his innocent face. Edmund watched the play of emotions across her features, the war between hope and fear, between the desire to trust and the learned instinct to protect herself. Finally, she looked up at him, and he saw that she had made her decision. "I will come with you to the capital," she said quietly. "Not because I fully trust you yet. I'm not sure I'm capable of fully trusting anyone after what I've been through, but because I believe you're sincere in your desire to help. And because staying here, in this castle where I was imprisoned, where Jonathan died, would be its own form of torture. I need to move forward, for Thomas's sake, if not my own." Edmund felt relief wash over him, stronger than the situation warranted. "Thank you. We'll leave in 3 days. That will give you time to continue recovering and allow me to finish securing this region. I'll ensure that the journey is as comfortable as possible for you and Thomas. We'll travel slowly with frequent stops, and you'll have a covered carriage so you're not exposed to the weather. 3 days, Rosalind repeated, as if testing the words. That seems both impossibly long and frighteningly short. So much has changed in just 1 day. I'm not sure I can process how much more might change in 3 days, or in the weeks that follow. Change can be difficult even when it's for the better, Edmund acknowledged. But you've survived far worse than change, Lady Rosalind. You've survived horrors that would have destroyed most people. I have faith that you'll adapt to these new circumstances as well. Thomas chose that moment to make his presence known again, letting out a wail that suggested he was either hungry or needed changing. Rosalind immediately began the soothing motions that had become second nature to her, but Edmund could see the fatigue in her face, the toll that the day's events had taken on her already depleted reserves. I'll leave you to care for him, Edmund said, moving toward the door. Rest well tonight, Lady Rosalind. Tomorrow we can discuss the practical arrangements for the journey. But for now, just focus on yourself and your son. He paused at the door, looking back at her. She stood silhouetted against the firelight, holding her child, looking simultaneously fragile and incredibly strong. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. I know I keep saying that, but I don't know what else to say. You've given me hope when I thought I had none left. That's a gift beyond price. Edmund nodded, not trusting himself to speak. There was something about the gratitude in her voice, the vulnerability in her eyes, that made him want to promise her things he had no business promising. He was a king with responsibilities to an entire realm. He could not afford to become emotionally entangled with a woman he barely knew, no matter how much her situation moved him. Yet, as he left her chambers and made his way through the castle corridors, he found his thoughts returning again and again to Rosalind Merrick, to the strength that had kept her alive through 12 years of suffering, to the love she showed her son despite everything she had endured, to the way her green eyes had looked in the firelight, holding both pain and hope in equal measure. The 3 days at Ravenholm Castle passed more quickly than Rosalind had anticipated, each one bringing small improvements to her physical condition and cautious steps toward reclaiming a sense of normalcy she had thought lost forever. Brother Aldrich visited daily, monitoring her progress and adjusting her tonics as needed. Beatrice proved to be an invaluable companion, patient and kind, helping Rosalind navigate the strange new world of freedom while respecting the invisible boundaries that trauma had created around her heart. On the second day, the castle seamstresses came to take Rosalind's measurements, bringing with them swaths of fabric in various colors and textures. They worked efficiently but gently, understanding without being told that sudden movements or unexpected touches made their subject flinch. By the evening of the third day, Rosalind had acquired several new dresses, each one tailored to fit her slender frame, made of fine wool and linen in colors that complemented her auburn hair and fair skin. There were deep greens that matched her eyes, soft grays that spoke of elegance without ostentation, and one dress of midnight blue with silver embroidery at the collar and cuffs that made her look almost regal. She had also been provided with warmer clothes for traveling, thick cloaks lined with fur, leather gloves and sturdy boots that would protect her feet during the journey. For Thomas, there were bundles of baby clothes, blankets, and everything a mother might need to care for an infant on the road. The abundance of it all still overwhelmed Rosalind at times, but she was learning to accept it with gratitude rather than the suspicious wariness that had been her first instinct. King Edmund had visited her chambers each evening, ostensibly to check on her welfare and discuss the arrangements for their departure, but Rosalind sensed there was more to his visits than simple duty. He seemed genuinely interested in her recovery, in Thomas's progress, in her thoughts and observations about the castle and the people within it. Their conversations had gradually become less formal, though they maintained the proper forms of address and behavior befitting their respective stations. On the evening before their scheduled departure, Edmund arrived carrying a leather-bound book under his arm. Rosalind had been standing at the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby. She turned at the sound of the door opening and smiled with a warmth that came more naturally now than it had 3 days earlier. "Your Majesty," she greeted him, curtsying gracefully. The movement no longer made her dizzy, evidence that Brother Aldrich's tonics and the steady supply of good food were having their intended effect. "You find us well this evening. Thomas has been an angel all day, and Beatrice tells me I'm looking healthier with each passing hour." Edmund returned her smile, his stern features softening in a way that made him appear younger and more approachable. "You do look much improved, Lady Rosalind. There's color in your cheeks now, and your eyes have lost some of the shadows that haunted them when we first met." He held up the book he carried. "I brought you something. I thought you might enjoy having reading material for the journey. It can be tedious, traveling for days in a carriage, and I remembered that your father was known for his love of books. I thought perhaps his daughter might share that trait." Rosalind's eyes lit up with genuine pleasure. "Books were my refuge when I was young," she said, reaching out to accept the volume he offered. "My father had an extensive library, and he encouraged me to read widely. Poetry, history, philosophy. He believed that education was important for both sons and daughters. I haven't held a book in 12 years. I had almost forgotten what it felt like." She ran her fingers reverently over the leather cover, then opened it carefully to examine the pages within. It was a collection of poems, she discovered, works by various authors compiled into a single volume. The pages were clean and the binding was solid, evidence of quality craftsmanship. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you, Your Majesty. This means more to me than you might realize." Edmund moved to stand beside her at the window, looking out at the darkening landscape. From this vantage point, they could see the valley below, where campfires from his army dotted the twilight like fallen stars. "I'm glad it pleases you. I'll have more books sent to your chambers once we reach the capital. The royal library is extensive, and you'll be welcome to make use of it whenever you wish." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching night claim the land. Finally, Edmund spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Tell me about your father, Lady Rosalind. I have memories of him from my youth, but they're the impressions of a boy, not the understanding of a man. What was he like as a father?" Rosalind smiled softly, lost in memory. "He was wonderful, patient, kind, endlessly curious about the world. He believed that knowledge was the greatest treasure anyone could possess, more valuable than gold or lands or titles. He would spend hours with me in his library, discussing books we'd read, debating ideas, encouraging me to think critically about everything." Her voice grew wistful. "He used to say that a sharp mind was the best defense against tyranny and injustice, that if people could think for themselves, question what they were told, they would be harder to manipulate or oppress. A wise philosophy," Edmund observed, "and one that served him well at court." "I remember my father saying that Lord James always offered counsel based on careful thought rather than personal ambition. That's a rare quality in a courtier. He taught me to value truth above convenience," Rosalind continued, her gaze still fixed on the distant horizon. "To speak honestly even when honesty was difficult. To stand by my principles even when doing so came at a cost." She paused, then added quietly, "I've tried to hold on to those teachings through everything that happened. There were times when it would have been easier to compromise, to give the men who held me what they wanted in exchange for better treatment, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't betray the values my father instilled in me, even when holding on to them meant suffering." Edmund turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Your father would be proud of you, Lady Rosalind. You've honored his memory with your courage and your integrity. Not many people could have endured what you've endured and still emerged with their principles intact." Rosalind met his gaze, and for a moment something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. She saw in his eyes a recognition of the cost of holding on to one's values in a world that often rewarded compromise and expedience. He saw in hers a reflection of his own commitment to justice and honor, regardless of the personal sacrifice required. "Tell me about tomorrow," Rosalind said, breaking the intensity of the moment. "What should I expect from the journey? I've been a prisoner for so long that I barely remember what it's like to travel freely." Edmund was grateful for the change of subject, sensing that they had ventured into emotional territory that was perhaps too intimate for comfort. "We'll depart at first light. The journey to the capital normally takes about 10 days, but we'll be traveling more slowly to accommodate you and Thomas. I expect it will take us closer to 2 weeks. You'll ride in a covered carriage with Beatrice, well cushioned and protected from the weather. I'll be on horseback for most of the journey, but I'll check on you regularly to ensure you're comfortable." "Will there be danger?" Rosalind asked, a hint of the old fear creeping into her voice. "Are the roads safe?" "I'm traveling with a full military escort," Edmund assured her. "Nearly 200 soldiers, all battle-hardened and loyal. No bandits or rebels would dare attack such a force. You'll be as safe as if you were behind castle walls." He hesitated, then added, "Though I should warn you that word of your existence has spread among my men. They're curious about the woman I freed from the dungeons, the lady who survived such hardship. You may find yourself the subject of considerable attention and speculation." Rosalind's expression became troubled. "What do they think of me? What do they say?" "They say," Edmund replied carefully, "that you must be remarkably strong to have survived what you've survived, that your son is fortunate to have such a devoted mother, that their king showed wisdom and mercy in rescuing you." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "They also speculate about your beauty, now that you've been cleaned up and properly dressed. Soldiers are not known for their subtlety in such matters." A faint blush colored Rosalind's cheeks, and she looked away, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm not sure I'm ready to be the subject of attention and gossip. I've spent so long trying to be invisible, trying not to attract notice, that the thought of people staring at me and talking about me is rather overwhelming. You'll have Beatrice with you, and guards who will ensure no one approaches you uninvited," Edmund said gently, "and I'll make it clear that you're under my personal protection. No one will dare trouble you inappropriately." He moved slightly closer, his voice dropping lower. "Lady Rosalind, I know this transition is difficult. You're moving from one extreme to another, from complete isolation to being surrounded by people who are intensely curious about you. But you're stronger than you realize. You've already proven that by surviving this long. I have no doubt that you'll adapt to these new circumstances as well." Rosalind looked up at him, and Edmund was struck again by the depth of emotion in her green eyes. There was gratitude there, certainly, but also something else. Something he couldn't quite identify, but that made his heart beat faster. "You have such faith in me," she said softly. "I'm not sure I've earned it, but I'm grateful for it nonetheless. It helps, knowing that someone believes in my ability to overcome this." "You've earned it 1,000 times over," Edmund said firmly. He reached out, then stopped himself, uncertain whether physical contact would be welcome or threatening. Rosalind noticed the aborted gesture and, after a moment's hesitation, extended her own hand. Edmund took it carefully, his large hand engulfing her smaller one, and he felt the same jolt of connection he had experienced the first time he had touched her, when he helped her from the dungeon cell. "Thank you," Rosalind whispered, "for everything, for saving us, for treating us with such kindness, for giving me hope that there might be a future worth living. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "There's no debt to repay," Edmund said, his thumb unconsciously stroking across the back of her hand before he realized what he was doing and stilled the movement. "Seeing you recover, seeing your son safe and healthy, that's payment enough." They stood like that for a long moment, hands joined, neither quite willing to break the connection. The intimacy of it was undeniable, and Edmund knew he should step back, should re-establish the proper distance between a king and his subject. But he found himself reluctant to let go, drawn to this woman in ways he was only beginning to understand and that both excited and alarmed him. It was Thomas who broke the spell, waking from his nap with a cry that quickly escalated into full-throated wailing. Rosalind immediately pulled her hand from Edmund's and hurried to the cradle, lifting her son and beginning the practiced motions of soothing him. Edmund watched, feeling the loss of her touch like a physical ache, and recognized with uncomfortable clarity that his feelings for Rosalind Merrick had progressed well beyond simple duty or compassion. He was attracted to her, deeply and powerfully attracted in ways he hadn't felt toward anyone in years. It was more than just her physical beauty, though she was undeniably lovely. It was her strength, her resilience, her refusal to be broken despite everything she had endured. It was the tenderness she showed her son, the intelligence in her eyes, the grace with which she carried herself despite her suffering. It was everything about her, and the intensity of his feelings after such a short acquaintance was both thrilling and deeply problematic. Edmund was a king with responsibilities that extended far beyond his personal desires. He needed to marry strategically, to form alliances that would strengthen his kingdom and secure his dynasty. Becoming entangled with a woman who had no lands, no political connections, no power to bring to such a union would be foolish at best and potentially disastrous at worst. His advisors would counsel against it strongly, and they would be right to do so. Yet as he watched Rosalind calm her son, singing softly to him in a voice sweet enough to banish nightmares, Edmund found that he didn't care about strategy or political advantage or what his advisors might say. He cared about this woman and her child. He wanted to see her smile more often, wanted to help her heal from the wounds that couldn't be seen. He wanted to be the man who made her feel safe again, who restored her faith in humanity. "I should leave you to care for him," Edmund said, forcing himself to move toward the door, even though every instinct urged him to stay. "We have an early start tomorrow. You should rest as much as possible tonight." Rosalind looked up from Thomas, and Edmund saw understanding in her eyes, as if she recognized the struggle he was having, even if she couldn't fully comprehend its cause. "Good night, Your Majesty. Thank you again for the book. I'll treasure it." "Sleep well, Lady Rosalind," Edmund replied, "and try not to worry about tomorrow. Everything will be fine. I promise you." He left the chamber before he could say or do something foolish, pulling the door closed behind him with more force than necessary. In the corridor outside, he found William Darkwater waiting, the commander's knowing expression suggesting he had been observing Edmund's visits to Rosalind's chambers with interest. "Everything in order for tomorrow's departure?" Edmund asked brusquely, not in the mood for whatever observations his old friend might be preparing to make. "Everything's ready, Your Majesty," William confirmed. He fell into step beside Edmund as they walked through the castle corridors. "The ladies' carriage is prepared. Supplies are loaded. The men are briefed on their assignments. We'll be ready to move at dawn." He paused, then added carefully, "The men are pleased with your decision to bring Lady Rosalind to the capital. They see it as evidence of your mercy and justice. It's good for morale, showing that you care about righting wrongs even from years past." Edmund grunted non-committally, knowing that William was building up to something more significant. They had known each other too long for him to miss the signs. "Of course," William continued, his tone deceptively casual. "There's also considerable speculation about your personal interest in the lady. The men have noticed how often you visit her chambers, how carefully you've arranged for her comfort. Some are wondering if your concern goes beyond simple duty." There it was. Edmund stopped walking and turned to face his commander, his expression stern. "My concern for Lady Rosalind is exactly what I've stated it to be. A king's duty to protect a subject who has been grievously wronged. Nothing more." William met his gaze steadily, unintimidated by the royal displeasure. They had been through too many battles together for him to be cowed by a stern look. "With respect, Your Majesty, I've known you since you were a boy. I can tell when something affects you more deeply than you're willing to admit, and I've seen the way you look at her. How I look at her is irrelevant," Edmund said flatly. "I have responsibilities that go beyond personal feelings. The kingdom needs alliances, needs strategic marriages that will strengthen our position. Becoming involved with a woman who has nothing to offer politically would be irresponsible." William's expression softened, and he placed a hand on Edmund's shoulder with the familiarity of long friendship. "Your Majesty, Edmund, you've spent your entire reign putting the kingdom first. You've fought wars, made difficult decisions, sacrificed personal happiness for the good of the realm. No one could question your dedication or your sense of duty. But you're also a man, not just a king. And sometimes the things that seem politically inconvenient are exactly what we need to be whole." Edmund wanted to argue, to insist that William was wrong, that his interest in Rosalind was purely honorable concern for a wronged subject. But he couldn't force the words past his lips, couldn't manufacture a lie convincing enough to fool a man who knew him so well. Instead, he sighed heavily, suddenly feeling the weight of all his responsibilities pressing down on him like physical burden. "It doesn't matter what I feel," he said quietly. "She's been through unimaginable trauma. The last thing she needs is pressure from another man with power over her, even if that pressure comes wrapped in kindness rather than cruelty. She needs time to heal, to find herself again. My role is to provide her with safety and justice. Nothing more." "Perhaps," William conceded. "But I think you underestimate her, Edmund. She's stronger than you realize, and she looks at you differently than she looks at other men. I've seen it. There's trust beginning to grow there, and maybe something more. Don't dismiss the possibility of happiness so quickly just because it doesn't fit neatly into your political calculations." Edmund shook his head, not trusting himself to respond. William was wrong. He had to be wrong. The way forward was clear. Deliver Rosalind safely to the capital, investigate the crimes committed against her, restore what could be restored of her position, and then step back. Let her build a new life for herself and her son, a life that didn't include complicated entanglements with a king who had an entire realm to govern. The resolution seemed clear in his mind as he made his way to his own chambers that night. It remained clear as he tried to sleep, tossing restlessly in the large bed. It was still clear the next morning as he dressed in traveling clothes and prepared to begin the journey home. Yet the moment he saw Rosalind emerge from the castle to board her carriage, all his careful reasoning evaporated like morning mist. She wore one of her new dresses, the deep green one that matched her eyes, with a thick cloak of gray wool lined with white fur against the morning chill. Her auburn hair had been braided and pinned up in a style that Beatrice had clearly helped her achieve, though a few loose strands framed her face in the crisp morning air. She carried Thomas wrapped securely in blankets, and despite the early hour and the obvious nervousness in her expression, she looked beautiful and dignified and utterly captivating. Edmund found himself walking toward her before he consciously decided to move, drawn by a force he couldn't name and didn't want to examine too closely. "Good morning, Lady Rosalind. I trust you slept well?" Rosalind turned at the sound of his voice, and her expression brightened with a smile that made Edmund's chest constrict. "As well as can be expected with a 4-month-old son, Your Majesty. Thomas woke twice during the night, but Beatrice helped me with him, so I was able to get some rest." She looked around at the bustling courtyard, where soldiers were making final preparations for departure, horses being saddled and supplies being loaded onto wagons. "It's quite an operation, isn't it? I hadn't realized how much effort goes into moving so many people. An army moves on organization and discipline," Edmund said, gesturing to the various activities. "Every man knows his role. Every supply is accounted for. It's the only way to manage this many people efficiently." He paused, then added, "Your carriage is ready. I've ensured it's well cushioned and supplied with everything you might need for the journey. There are extra blankets, food, water, and anything else Beatrice thought you might require." "You've thought of everything," Rosalind said softly, her green eyes searching his face as if trying to understand the man behind the crown. "I'm not accustomed to being cared for so thoroughly. It's strange, but not unwelcome." Beatrice emerged from the castle entrance carrying several bags, and Edmund signaled for soldiers to help her load them into the carriage. The vehicle itself was impressive, a large enclosed carriage with windows that could be covered with oiled cloth to keep out rain and wind. The interior had been fitted with cushioned seats, and there was even a small brazier that could be lit if the weather turned cold. "Shall we get you settled?" Edmund offered, extending his hand to help Rosalind up into the carriage. She placed her free hand in his, and he felt that now familiar jolt of connection as their skin touched. He steadied her as she climbed the steps, careful not to jostle Thomas, and once she was safely inside, he reluctantly released her hand. "I'll ride alongside the carriage for the first part of the journey," Edmund told her. "If you need anything, just signal through the window and we'll stop immediately. Don't hesitate to speak up if you're uncomfortable or if Thomas needs attention." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Rosalind said, settling into the cushioned seat with Thomas in her arms. Beatrice climbed in after her, arranging blankets and bags with practiced efficiency. "I feel safer knowing you'll be nearby." Those simple words affected Edmund more deeply than they should have. The trust implicit in them, the vulnerability she was allowing herself to show, it meant something. It meant she was beginning to believe in his protection, beginning to let down some of the defensive walls that trauma had built around her heart. The journey began as the sun climbed above the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Edmund rode at the head of the column on his massive war horse, a gray destrier that stood 17 hands high and had carried him through countless battles. But today, instead of focusing on the road ahead and the strategic concerns of moving so many men, he found his attention drawn repeatedly to the carriage where Rosalind rode. The landscape they traveled through was beautiful in the austere way of northern England. Rolling hills covered in winter-brown grass, ancient forests of oak and ash standing like sentinels along the valleys, streams that ran clear and cold over beds of smooth stone. The roads were in reasonable condition, maintained by the various lords through whose territories they passed, and the weather held fair, cold but clear with only a few scattered clouds. They stopped for a midday meal at a clearing beside a stream, and Edmund personally went to check on Rosalind, finding her standing beside the carriage with Thomas in her arms, breathing deeply of the fresh air and looking around with wonder on her face. "It's so beautiful," she said when she saw him approaching. "I'd forgotten how vast and lovely the world is. For so long my entire universe was the walls of a cell. Now there's sky stretching to infinity, forests and hills and all this space. It's almost overwhelming." Edmund understood what she meant. After the constraints of her captivity, the openness of the landscape must seem almost vertiginous. "Take your time adjusting," he suggested gently. "There's no rush. We have the entire afternoon ahead of us, and we'll only travel as far as you're comfortable with today." They ate a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried meat, with ale to wash it down. Rosalind sat on a fallen log, nursing Thomas discreetly, while Beatrice kept watch to ensure her privacy. Edmund found himself sitting nearby, ostensibly consulting with William about the afternoon's travel plans, but in reality just wanting to be close to her, to be available if she needed anything. As they prepared to resume their journey, one of the younger soldiers approached Edmund hesitantly. The man, perhaps 20 years old, with the gangly build of youth not yet fully grown into his frame, bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but some of the men were wondering, is it true that the lady in the carriage is Lady Rosalind Merrick, Lord James's daughter who was thought dead?" Edmund's expression became stern. "Why do you ask, soldier?" The young man flushed but held his ground. "My grandfather served Lord James, Your Majesty. He always spoke of him with great respect, said he was the finest man he ever knew. If his daughter lives, if she's truly here, my grandfather would want me to honor her memory by showing her the respect she's due. We all would. The men who remember Lord James, I mean." Edmund's expression softened. The soldier's intentions were clearly good, born of genuine respect rather than idle curiosity. "Yes, she is Lady Rosalind Merrick, and you're right to honor your grandfather's memory by treating her with respect. Spread the word among the men. She's under my personal protection, and anyone who treats her with anything less than the courtesy due to a lady of noble birth will answer to me." "Yes, Your Majesty. Thank you." The soldier bowed again and hurried back to his companions, and Edmund saw him speaking urgently to a group of older men, who nodded seriously and cast respectful glances toward the carriage. When they resumed their journey, Edmund noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere. The soldiers they passed on the road bowed more deeply, and those who caught sight of Rosalind through the carriage window offered respectful nods. Word was spreading through the ranks about who she was and what she had endured, and the men were responding with the kind of respect that Edmund had hoped for, but hadn't been entirely sure he would receive. The afternoon passed peacefully, the miles falling away beneath horses' hooves and wagon wheels. They stopped twice more, once to water the horses and once because Thomas needed attention. Each time, Edmund found himself drawn to the carriage, checking on Rosalind's welfare, ensuring she was comfortable, engaging in brief conversations that revealed more about her character and intelligence with each exchange. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, William rode up beside Edmund. "There's an inn about 2 miles ahead, Your Majesty. The Silver Hart. It's a substantial establishment, used to accommodating nobles and their retinues. I sent a rider ahead to secure rooms. They're preparing their best chambers for you and Lady Rosalind." Edmund nodded approval. "Good. We'll stop there for the night. The men can camp in the surrounding fields, but I want guards posted around the inn. Lady Rosalind's safety is paramount." They reached the Silver Hart as twilight was painting the sky in shades of purple and deep blue. The inn was indeed substantial, a 3-story building of stone and timber with a steeply pitched roof and mullioned windows that glowed with welcoming light. The innkeeper, a portly man with a florid face and an obsequious manner, rushed out to greet them, bowing so deeply he nearly fell over. "Your Majesty, such an honor. We've prepared everything as your man requested. Our finest rooms, fresh linens, hot water for bathing, and we're preparing a feast worthy of a king." Edmund dismounted, handing his horse's reins to a waiting groom, and immediately went to the carriage. He opened the door himself and extended his hand to help Rosalind down. She took it gratefully, her legs stiff from the long day of travel, and he steadied her as she found her footing on the ground. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly, studying her face for signs of exhaustion or distress. "Was the journey too difficult?" "I'm tired," Rosalind admitted, "but it wasn't terrible. The carriage is comfortable, and the countryside is so beautiful that watching it pass helped the time go quickly." She shifted Thomas in her arms, the infant drowsy and content. "He did remarkably well, too. I think he enjoyed the motion of the carriage. It lulled him to sleep for most of the afternoon." The innkeeper was hovering nearby, clearly uncertain how to address Rosalind, but aware that she must be important given the king's attention to her. Edmund made the decision for him. This is Lady Rosalind Merrick, daughter of Lord James Merrick, who served my father. She and her son are under my protection and are to be afforded every courtesy. She'll require a private chamber with accommodations for her infant son and her attendant. Of course, Your Majesty. Of course. Right this way, my lady. The innkeeper bowed to Rosalind with exaggerated respect, then led them into the inn. The interior was warm and clean, with a large common room dominated by a massive fireplace where a fire crackled cheerfully. The scent of roasting meat and fresh bread filled the air, making Edmund realize how hungry he was. But before seeing to his own needs, he wanted to ensure Rosalind was properly settled. The innkeeper led them up a staircase to the second floor, chattering the entire way about the accommodations he had prepared. The finest room in the establishment, Your Majesty, with a view of the gardens and the stream beyond. Fresh linens on the bed, a fire already laid, and we've set up a smaller bed for the lady's attendant. There's a cradle for the infant, and I've sent for a wet nurse from the village in case the lady requires assistance. That won't be necessary, Rosalind said quickly, her arms tightening protectively around Thomas. I nurse my son myself. Of course, my lady, of course. Whatever you prefer. The innkeeper opened a door, revealing a spacious chamber with a large bed covered in clean blankets, a fireplace where flames danced merrily, and several comfortable chairs. It was simple but clean and well appointed, far better than many roadside inns could offer. Beatrice entered first, immediately beginning to arrange their belongings and settle Thomas into the provided cradle. Rosalind stood in the doorway, and Edmund saw tears glistening in her eyes as she looked around the room. It's wonderful, she whispered. A real bed, a warm fire, safety. 3 days ago I couldn't have imagined any of this. Now it's real. Edmund felt his heart constrict at the emotion in her voice. You deserve this and so much more, Lady Rosalind. This is just the beginning. When we reach the capital, you'll have a proper household, everything you need to rebuild your life. She turned to him, and the gratitude and something else, something deeper and more complicated, in her eyes made it difficult for Edmund to breathe. You've given me my life back, Your Majesty. I don't know how I'll ever adequately thank you. No thanks are necessary, Edmund said, though his voice was rougher than usual. Just rest well tonight. Recover your strength. That's all I ask. The journey to the capital continued over the following days, each one bringing them closer to Edmund's seat of power and deeper into a relationship that was becoming increasingly difficult to define. They traveled through changing landscapes, from the rugged hills of the north to the gentler countryside of the Midlands, passing through villages and towns where people came out to watch their king's procession with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Rosalind grew stronger with each passing day. The regular meals, the fresh air, and the absence of fear were working a transformation that was remarkable to witness. Color returned to her cheeks, the hollows beneath her eyes filled out, and her movements became more confident and assured. She spent her days in the carriage reading the book Edmund had given her, caring for Thomas, and talking with Beatrice about everything from court etiquette to current events, absorbing information like a plant long denied water finally receiving rain. Edmund found excuses to ride beside the carriage more often than tactical necessity required. He would engage Rosalind in conversation through the window, discussing the lands they passed through, the history of various regions, the political situation of the realm. She proved to be an astute observer and an intelligent conversationalist, her father's training evident in the way she analyzed situations and asked penetrating questions. On the 5th evening of their journey, they stopped at a larger town where Edmund had arranged for them to stay in a manor house belonging to a local lord who was away at court. The accommodations were more luxurious than the roadside inns they had been using, with proper bedchambers, a great hall, and even a small library. After dinner, Edmund found himself in that library with Rosalind, both of them drawn to the books as if by instinct. This collection is impressive for a provincial manor, Rosalind observed, running her fingers along the spines of leather-bound volumes. Lord Pemberton must be a man of learning. He is, Edmund confirmed, watching her examine the books with obvious pleasure. He's also one of my more reliable vassals, loyal and competent. His son serves in my personal guard. He paused, then added, I thought you might enjoy having access to these books tonight. I know the one I gave you has probably been read through several times by now. Rosalind turned to him with a smile that made his heart skip. You thought correctly. I've read every poem in that volume at least 3 times. Having access to more books is a luxury I deeply appreciate. She selected a volume and opened it carefully, her expression becoming wistful. My father used to say that books were windows into other minds, other times, other possibilities. That reading was a way of living 1,000 lives instead of just one. I used to take that for granted, the ability to read whenever I wished. Now I treasure each opportunity. Edmund moved closer, looking over her shoulder at the book she had chosen. It was a history of the kingdom, one of the more scholarly works that detailed the reigns of various monarchs and the political developments that had shaped the realm. You choose heavy reading, he observed. Most ladies prefer poetry or romantic tales. I enjoy those too, Rosalind said, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. But my father raised me to think seriously about the world, to understand the forces that shape society and politics. Besides, she added with a slight smile, romantic tales feel rather hollow when you've lived through the reality of how cruel the world can actually be. History, at least, is honest about human nature, both its capacity for greatness and its potential for evil. The observation was astute and somewhat melancholy, and it reminded Edmund of how much Rosalind had lost beyond just her freedom. She had lost her innocence, her ability to see the world through the optimistic eyes of youth. The men who had held her captive had stolen that from her, along with her liberty. You're right, Edmund said quietly. History is brutally honest, but I hope you don't lose your ability to believe in the possibility of goodness as well. The world has shown you its worst face, but there are still good people in it, still honor and kindness and love worth believing in. Rosalind looked up at him, and Edmund found himself caught in the depths of her green eyes. They were standing very close, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she had bathed with, could see the delicate curve of her neck and the pulse beating at her throat. The awareness of her as a woman, not just a victim he was trying to help, hit him with almost physical force. You've shown me that, she said softly. You've reminded me that not all men use their power to hurt others, that some men can be trusted, can be kind without expecting payment. You've given me back my faith in humanity, Your Majesty, and that's a gift I never expected to receive. The way she was looking at him, with such openness and trust and something that might have been admiration or perhaps something deeper, made Edmund's carefully maintained self-control begin to crack. He wanted to close the small distance between them, to touch her face, to see if her lips were as soft as they appeared. The desire was so strong it was almost overwhelming, and he had to physically step back to prevent himself from acting on it. I should let you rest, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. We have another long day of travel tomorrow. He saw confusion flicker across Rosalind's face, followed by something that might have been hurt or disappointment, quickly masked. Of course, Your Majesty. Thank you for showing me the library. I'll take this book with me, if that's permitted. Take whatever you like, Edmund said, already moving toward the door, needing distance before he did something foolish. Good night, Lady Rosalind. He left the library quickly, his heart pounding and his thoughts in turmoil. William's words from days earlier echoed in his mind. You're also a man, not just a king. But being a man with personal desires and being a king with responsibilities to an entire realm were not easily reconciled, especially when those desires focused on a woman whose vulnerability made any relationship deeply problematic. Edmund spent a restless night, his sleep plagued by dreams he couldn't quite remember upon waking, but that left him feeling unsettled and anxious. When morning came, he threw himself into the practical concerns of continuing their journey, using the demands of leadership to distract himself from thoughts of Rosalind, but avoiding her entirely proved impossible. As they traveled through increasingly civilized countryside, approaching the heart of the kingdom, Edmund found himself drawn to her company despite his better judgment. Their conversations continued, growing more personal and revealing with each exchange. She told him about her childhood, about her dreams before tragedy struck, about her fears for Thomas's future. He found himself sharing things he rarely discussed with anyone: the weight of kingship, the loneliness of power, the difficulty of making decisions that affected thousands of lives. On the 10th day of their journey, they reached the final inn before the capital, a large establishment that catered to nobles and wealthy merchants. That evening, as they dined in a private room Edmund had requested, the conversation turned to what would happen once they reached the city. I've arranged for you to have chambers in the palace itself, Edmund explained, watching Rosalind's reaction carefully. They're in the guest wing, spacious and comfortable. with rooms for Beatrice and a proper nursery for Thomas. You'll have access to the palace grounds, the gardens, the library. You'll be free to come and go as you please, though I would ask that you take guards with you if you leave the palace grounds. The capital can be dangerous for a woman alone, especially one of noble birth. Rosalind set down her cup of wine, her expression thoughtful. You're being very generous, Your Majesty. More generous than I have any right to expect. But I have to ask, what happens after that? Once we've settled into these chambers, once the investigation into my past is complete, what becomes of me? I have no lands, no income, no family to return to. I'm a woman with an infant son and no prospects. Eventually, your hospitality will become an imposition, and I'll need to find a way to support myself and Thomas. Edmund had been thinking about this question since the day he found her in the dungeon, and he still didn't have a satisfactory answer. The obvious solution would be to arrange a marriage for her, to find some minor noble who would take her as a wife and provide for her and Thomas in exchange for the royal favor such a match would bring. But the thought of Rosalind married to someone else, sharing her life and her bed with another man, filled Edmund with a possessive fury that had no rational basis. I'm working on that, he said carefully. If we can prove that you were wrongfully deprived of your inheritance, if the Merrick lands can be restored to you, that would provide you with income and status. It would give you options, independence. That's one reason why the investigation is so important. I want to give you back what was stolen from you. And if that's not possible, Rosalind pressed, if the lands are gone, if there's no way to restore what was lost, what then? Edmund met her gaze directly. Then we'll find another solution. I won't abandon you, Lady Rosalind. You have my word on that. Whatever happens, you and Thomas will be provided for. You'll never have to return to the circumstances you endured. Never. The intensity in his voice surprised them both. Rosalind's eyes widened slightly, and Edmund saw her hand tremble as she reached for her wine again. Why? She asked softly. Why do you care so much about what happens to me? I'm grateful, deeply grateful, but I don't understand why you would commit yourself so completely to helping someone you barely know. It was the question Edmund had been avoiding asking himself, and he found he couldn't give her a dishonest answer. Not when she was looking at him with such open vulnerability, such desperate need to understand. Because, he said slowly, choosing his words with care, from the moment I saw you in that cell, holding your son with such fierce love despite everything you had suffered, I knew that you were someone extraordinary, someone worth protecting, worth helping. And as I've come to know you better over these past days, that conviction has only grown stronger. He paused, then added with complete honesty, you're brave, intelligent, compassionate, despite every reason to be bitter. You've survived horrors that would have broken most people, yet you haven't let them destroy the essential goodness in you. How could I not care about what happens to someone like that? How could I not want to help restore the life that was stolen from you? Rosalind's eyes had filled with tears, and one spilled over, tracking down her cheek. You see me so differently than anyone else has in 12 years, she whispered. Everyone else saw a victim, a thing to be used or pitied. You see a person. You see someone worth valuing. I didn't realize how much I needed that until you gave it to me. Edmund found himself moving without conscious decision, circling the table to kneel beside her chair. He pulled out his handkerchief and gently wiped away her tears, his touch careful and reverent. You are worth valuing, Rosalind. Never doubt that. What was done to you was evil, but it doesn't define you. You define yourself by how you've survived, by the love you show your son, by the dignity you've maintained despite everything. She turned to face him more fully, and suddenly they were very close, his hand still at her face, her eyes locked on his. Edmund could feel the warmth of her breath, could see the rapid pulse at her throat, could sense the same awareness and attraction he was feeling reflected in her expression. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, with the potential for something neither of them had acknowledged but both felt. Edmund, she whispered, using his given name for the first time, and the sound of it on her lips broke through the last of his resistance. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she didn't. Instead, she met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like something fundamental shifting into place. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them aware of how fragile this moment was. But then Rosalind's hand came up to rest against Edmund's chest, and he deepened the kiss, pouring into it all the feelings he had been trying to suppress. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Edmund rested his forehead against hers. His eyes closed as he tried to regain his equilibrium. "I shouldn't have done that," he said, though he made no move to pull away. "You're vulnerable. You're under my protection. I had no right to take advantage of that." "You're not taking advantage," Rosalind said firmly. "Edmund, look at me." When he opened his eyes, she continued, "I wanted that kiss as much as you did. I've been feeling this pull between us for days now. This connection that I didn't dare name because I thought it was impossible. But it's not impossible, is it? This thing between us, whatever it is, it's real." Edmund cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking across her cheekbones. "It's real," he admitted. "God help me, it's real. But Rosalind, I'm a king. I have responsibilities, political considerations. My advisors will expect me to marry strategically, to form alliances. A relationship between us would be complicated, possibly even dangerous for you." "I know," Rosalind said. "I understand the obstacles. But Edmund, I've spent 12 years being afraid, being cautious, protecting myself because no one else would. I don't want to live that way anymore. If there's a chance for something real between us, something honest and good, I want to take it, even if it's difficult, even if it's risky." Edmund pulled her into his arms, holding her close, feeling her heart beating against his chest. "We'll figure it out," he promised. "Somehow we'll find a way. I'm not willing to let you go, Rosalind. Not now that I've found you." They arrived at the capital on a crisp morning 2 days later, the city rising before them like a testament to centuries of power and civilization. The sight of it took Rosalind's breath away. Massive stone walls encircled the sprawling metropolis, punctuated by watchtowers and fortified gates. Beyond the walls, she could see countless buildings stretching toward the sky, their rooftops creating a patchwork of slate and thatch. At the city's heart, dominating the skyline, stood the royal palace, a magnificent structure of gray stone with soaring towers and pennants bearing the royal standard snapping in the wind. Rosalind pressed her face to the carriage window, drinking in every detail. It had been so long since she had seen anything beyond prison walls and the limited vistas of their journey. The sheer scale of the city, the thousands of lives being lived within those walls, felt almost overwhelming. Beside her, Thomas gurgled happily, as if sensing his mother's excitement, and Beatrice smiled indulgently at them both. "It's magnificent," Rosalind breathed. "I remember visiting here once as a girl, but my memories don't do it justice. It's so much larger than I recalled, so alive." Edmund had ridden up beside the carriage, and through the window, Rosalind could see the pride on his face as he looked at his capital. "The city has grown considerably in the past decade," he said. "Commerce has flourished, bringing people from all corners of the realm. It's not without its problems. Poverty and crime exist here as they do everywhere, but overall, it's a thriving, vital place." As they passed through the main gate, the guards snapping to attention and saluting their king, Rosalind was struck by the energy of the city. The streets were packed with people going about their daily business, merchants hawking their wares, craftsmen working in open-fronted shops, women carrying baskets of goods from market, children darting between adults in elaborate games of chase. The sounds were almost overwhelming after the relative quiet of their journey. A cacophony of voices, animal sounds, the clatter of wheels on cobblestones, the ring of hammers on anvils. People recognized the royal procession and moved aside, many bowing or removing their caps as the king passed. Rosalind saw curiosity on their faces as they tried to glimpse who rode in the fine carriage beside their king's horse. She pulled back slightly from the window, suddenly self-conscious about being on display. "Don't hide," Edmund said gently, noticing her withdrawal. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. You're Lady Rosalind Merrick, and you have every right to hold your head high in this city." His words gave her courage, and she straightened her shoulders, meeting the curious gazes with the dignity her father had taught her. She was not a victim to be pitied or an oddity to be stared at. She was a woman who had survived and endured, and she would face whatever came next with grace and strength. The palace grounds were even more impressive than the city itself. They passed through another set of gates into a vast courtyard, where fountains played and gardens stretched in formal patterns. The palace rose before them, 5 stories of magnificent architecture with countless windows reflecting the morning sun. Servants and guards moved with purposeful efficiency, and Rosalind could feel the organized power of the place. the sense that this was the beating heart of the kingdom. Edmund dismounted and immediately came to help Rosalind from the carriage. His hand was warm and steady as she stepped down, Thomas secure in her other arm. Beatrice followed, her experienced eye already assessing their surroundings and planning how best to navigate this new environment. "Welcome to the royal palace," Edmund said, his voice carrying both pride and something more personal. "This is your home now, Rosalind, for as long as you need it to be." A distinguished-looking man in his 60s approached, dressed in fine robes that marked him as someone of importance within the palace hierarchy. He bowed deeply to Edmund, then turned an appraising but not unkind eye toward Rosalind. "Your Majesty, welcome home. I trust your campaign was successful." "It was, Lord Chancellor. I'll brief you on the details shortly, but first allow me to introduce Lady Rosalind Merrick, daughter of Lord James Merrick, who served my father. She and her son will be residing in the palace as my guests. Please see that chambers are prepared in the guest wing, the best available, and ensure that her needs are attended to immediately." The Lord Chancellor's eyebrows rose slightly at the name Merrick, and Rosalind saw recognition flicker across his aged features. "Lord James's daughter? But I understood that the entire Merrick family perished in the plague years ago." "The reports were incorrect," Edmund said, his tone brooking no argument. "Lady Rosalind survived, though she has endured considerable hardship in the years since. I expect her to be treated with the utmost respect and courtesy befitting her station. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, Your Majesty," the Lord Chancellor said, bowing again. He turned to Rosalind with genuine respect. "My lady, I remember your father well. He was a man of great wisdom and integrity. It is an honor to welcome his daughter to the palace. I am Lord Chancellor Benedict Ashford, and I place myself and the palace staff at your disposal." "Thank you, Lord Chancellor," Rosalind said, grateful that her voice came out steady despite her nervousness. "Your kindness is most appreciated." Over the next hour, Rosalind was swept up in a whirlwind of activity. Servants led her through seemingly endless corridors to a suite of chambers that took her breath away. The rooms were spacious and beautifully appointed, with tall windows overlooking the palace gardens, fine furniture upholstered in rich fabrics, and artwork adorning the walls. There was a large bedchamber for her, a smaller adjoining room for Beatrice, and a proper nursery for Thomas that had been hastily but thoroughly prepared with everything an infant might need. "This is too much," Rosalind protested weakly as servants bustled about, unpacking the belongings that had been brought from the carriage and arranging everything to perfection. "I don't need such luxury. His Majesty's orders were very specific," one of the senior servants, a woman named Margaret, who had been assigned as Rosalind's personal maid, said firmly but kindly. "He wants you to be comfortable, my lady. And if I may say so, after what you've endured, you deserve every comfort we can provide." Word of who she was had clearly spread quickly through the palace staff, and Rosalind could see the mixture of curiosity and sympathy in the servants' eyes as they worked. But there was also respect, which surprised her. These people had known, or at least heard of her father, and his reputation extended beyond the grave to shelter his daughter. Edmund came to check on her that evening, after she had bathed, changed into one of her new dresses, this one a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and settled Thomas for the night. He found her standing at the window, looking out at the city lights that twinkled in the gathering darkness like earthbound stars. "What do you think?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Will the chambers suit you?" "They're beautiful," Rosalind said honestly. "More than I ever dreamed of having again. But Edmund, this is all happening so fast. This morning we were on the road, and now I'm living in the royal palace in rooms fit for a princess. I feel like I'm in a dream that might shatter at any moment." Edmund took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers in a gesture that had become natural over the past few days of their journey. "It's not a dream. It's real, and it's permanent. You're safe here, Rosalind. You and Thomas both." She turned to face him, her free hand reaching up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I know you believe that, but Edmund, we need to talk about what happens next, about us. That kiss 2 nights ago changed everything, and we can't pretend it didn't." Edmund covered her hand with his, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. "I know, and I've been thinking about it constantly. Rosalind, I need to be honest with you about the challenges we face. My council of advisors has been pressuring me for years to marry, to secure the succession. They have candidates in mind, daughters of powerful houses that would bring political advantages, When they learn about you, about my feelings for you, they're going to object strenuously. Because I bring nothing, Rosalind said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. No lands, no alliances, no political value. Just a traumatized woman with another man's child. I understand why they would see me as an unsuitable match for their king. You bring everything that matters, Edmund said fiercely, pulling her closer. Intelligence, courage, compassion, strength. You're a woman of noble birth with impeccable lineage. Your father served my father with distinction. And as for Thomas, he's an innocent child who deserves a father's love regardless of whose blood runs in his veins. If I choose to offer him that love, to raise him as my own son, that's my decision to make. Rosalind's eyes widened with shock. Edmund, you can't mean that. Raising another man's child as your heir? Your council would never accept it. The realm would be thrown into chaos over questions of succession. Thomas wouldn't be my heir, Edmund clarified. My own children would inherit the throne. But I could legitimize him, give him a title, ensure his future is secure. There are precedents for such things, Rosalind. It's not as impossible as you might think. She searched his face, trying to understand the depth of his commitment. Why would you do that? Why would you take on such complications for me? Edmund cupped her face in his hands, his gray eyes intense with emotion. Because I'm falling in love with you, Rosalind. I've been fighting it, telling myself it's too soon, too complicated, too many obstacles. But the truth is, I've been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you in that dungeon, refusing to be broken despite everything you'd endured. Every conversation we've had, every moment we've spent together, has only deepened those feelings. Rosalind felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. It terrifies me because I swore I would never let myself be vulnerable to a man's power again. But you're different, Edmund. You've shown me that power can be used for protection rather than domination, that strength can be gentle, that I can trust again without being betrayed. Edmund kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, pouring all his feelings into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, and Edmund rested his forehead against hers. We'll face the council together, he promised, and whatever objections they raise, we'll overcome them. I'm not willing to give you up, Rosalind. Not for political expediency, not for anyone's approval. You're too important to me. What if they refuse to accept me? Rosalind asked, voicing her deepest fear. What if they threaten rebellion or try to force you to choose between me and the stability of the realm? Then they'll learn that their king is not a puppet to be manipulated, Edmund said firmly. I've spent my entire reign putting the kingdom first, making sacrifices for the good of the realm. But some things are worth fighting for, worth taking risks for. You're one of those things, Rosalind. We both deserve happiness, and if we've found it with each other, then I'll be damned if I let politics destroy it. Over the following days, Rosalind began to settle into palace life. Edmund introduced her to various members of his household, and she was struck by how many of them remembered her father with respect and affection. The older courtiers especially seemed pleased to see Lord James's daughter alive, and they welcomed her with a warmth that helped ease her transition into this new world. Brother Aldrich continued to monitor her health and Thomas's, and he reported to Edmund with satisfaction that both mother and child were thriving. The regular meals, the safety, the absence of stress were all contributing to Rosalind's recovery. She was gaining weight, her face filling out to reveal the true beauty that had been hidden by starvation. Her hair, now regularly washed and properly cared for, gleamed like burnished copper. She looked less like a victim and more like the lady she had been born to be. Edmund had also set his investigators to work on uncovering the truth about what had happened to Rosalind and the Merrick estates. Riders had been sent to question servants who had worked for the Merricks, to examine records from the time of the plague, to investigate Lord Reginald Thornfield's acquisition of the Merrick lands. The truth was beginning to emerge, and it was even uglier than Edmund had anticipated. On the 5th day after their arrival, Edmund called a meeting of his privy council. It was time to inform them of Rosalind's presence and his intentions regarding her. He knew it would not be an easy conversation, but it was necessary. The council chamber was a long room with a massive oak table at its center, around which sat the most powerful men in the kingdom, the Lord Chancellor, the Master of Coin, the High Marshal, the Archbishop, and several other influential nobles and advisors. Edmund entered with his usual commanding presence, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Gentlemen, thank you for gathering on short notice. I have several matters to discuss with you. But first, I want to address the question that I know has been circulating through the palace, the identity and status of the young woman who arrived with me from Ravenholm." The Lord Chancellor spoke first, his voice carefully neutral. "Your Majesty, we've heard the rumors. That she is Lady Rosalind Merrick, supposedly dead these 12 years. That you rescued her from Lord Thomas's dungeons. That you've shown her considerable favor. Naturally, there is much speculation about your intentions." Edmund met the Lord Chancellor's gaze steadily, his expression revealing nothing of the tension he felt. "The rumors are accurate. Lady Rosalind Merrick is indeed alive, though she has endured 12 years of captivity and abuse that should never have befallen a woman of her station. As for my intentions, they are threefold. First, to investigate the crimes committed against her and her family. Second, to restore what can be restored of her position and inheritance. And third, to ensure her safety and welfare for the remainder of her life." Lord Pembroke, the Master of Coin, leaned forward with a frown creasing his weathered face. "Your Majesty, while we all respect the memory of Lord James Merrick and sympathize with his daughter's suffering, we must consider the practical implications. The woman has been held captive for over a decade, passed between various men, and she now has an illegitimate child. Her reputation, fairly or unfairly, is compromised. Housing her in the palace, showing her such favor, will inevitably lead to speculation about the nature of your relationship with her." "Let them speculate," Edmund said coldly. "Lady Rosalind's circumstances are not her fault. She was victimized repeatedly by men who should have protected her. I will not compound those crimes by treating her as though her suffering has somehow tainted her character. She is a woman of noble birth who deserves to be treated with respect, and that is exactly what will happen under my roof." The Archbishop, an elderly man with kind eyes but a practical mind, spoke next. "Your Majesty, no one here questions your compassion or your sense of justice. But we must also consider your position. You are unmarried, and the succession remains unsecured. The realm needs stability, which means you need to marry and produce legitimate heirs. We have discussed several excellent candidates, daughters of powerful houses who would bring significant political advantages. If you become romantically entangled with Lady Rosalind, it will complicate these negotiations considerably." Edmund had known this conversation was coming, but hearing it stated so bluntly still made his jaw tighten. "And if I told you that I have no interest in these political marriages you've been arranging behind my back? That I've found someone I actually care about? Someone who would make me happy rather than simply advantageous?" Silence fell over the council chamber, heavy and tense. The advisors exchanged glances, clearly surprised by Edmund's directness. Finally, the High Marshal, Sir Geoffrey Winters, spoke. He was a blunt man, a career soldier who had served Edmund's father and now served Edmund with unwavering loyalty. "Your Majesty, are you saying you wish to marry Lady Rosalind?" "I'm saying that I'm considering it very seriously," Edmund replied. "And before any of you launch into arguments about why it would be foolish or politically inadvisable, let me lay out the facts as I see them. Lady Rosalind is the daughter of one of my father's most trusted advisors. Her lineage is impeccable, her education is excellent, and she has proven herself to be intelligent, courageous, and resilient. She would make a fine queen." "She has no lands, no wealth, no political connections," Lord Pembroke objected. "A royal marriage should strengthen the kingdom, should forge alliances or bring resources. What does Lady Rosalind bring beyond her admittedly distinguished father's name?" "She brings exactly what this kingdom needs," Edmund said, his voice rising with passion. "A queen who understands suffering, who will advocate for the powerless because she knows what it means to be powerless. A queen who values justice and mercy in equal measure. A queen who will not be swayed by political expediency, but will counsel me based on genuine compassion and wisdom. Those qualities are worth more than all the gold and alliances in the world." The Lord Chancellor raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Your Majesty, please understand that we're not dismissing Lady Rosalind's virtues, but we must also consider the practical realities. She has a child by another man. The succession could become complicated. There are questions about her status during the years of her captivity. These are not insurmountable obstacles, but they are significant, which is why I've set investigators to work uncovering the full truth of what happened to her," Edmund said. "And what they've discovered is damning. Lord Reginald Thornfield not only falsified the reports of Rosalind's death, But he also forged documents transferring the Merrick estates to his control. He then sold Rosalind into what was essentially slavery, passing her from one captor to another. His son, the current Lord Thornfield, has been using those stolen lands to enrich himself for years. He pulled out several documents and spread them on the table. These are witness statements from servants who worked in the Merrick household at the time of the plague. They confirm that Rosalind survived the illness. These are financial records showing suspicious payments from Reginald Thornfield to various individuals around the time Rosalind disappeared. And this is a letter, recently discovered in Thornfield's papers after his death, in which he explicitly discusses his plan to claim the Merrick estates by eliminating the rightful heir. The council members leaned forward to examine the documents, their expressions becoming increasingly grave as they read. The Archbishop shook his head sadly. "This is terrible, a grave injustice. Lord James served the crown faithfully, and his daughter should never have suffered such betrayal." "Exactly," Edmund said, "which is why I'm proposing the following. First, the Merrick estates will be stripped from the current Lord Thornfield and restored to Lady Rosalind as the rightful heir. Second, Lord Thornfield will be tried for his father's crimes, as he has knowingly profited from stolen property. Third, Lady Rosalind will be formally recognized by the Crown as the head of House Merrick, with all the rights and privileges that entails." Lord Pembroke was nodding slowly, his financial mind already working through the implications. If Lady Rosalind has her lands and title restored, that changes the political calculus considerably. She would no longer be a woman with nothing to offer. She would be a lady in her own right, with an estate that, if I recall correctly, was quite profitable before the plague. It was indeed, the Lord Chancellor confirmed. The Merrick lands are fertile and well-positioned for trade. With proper management, they could generate significant income. If Lady Rosalind is restored to her inheritance, she becomes a much more suitable candidate for a royal marriage. Edmund felt a surge of satisfaction. His advisors were practical men, and he had anticipated that demonstrating Rosalind's political value would help them accept what his heart had already decided. "I'm glad you see it that way, but I want to be clear. My interest in Lady Rosalind is not primarily based on her potential political value. I care for her deeply, and I believe she would make an excellent queen regardless of her material circumstances. The restoration of her lands is about justice, not about making her an acceptable bride." Sir Geoffrey, the High Marshal, spoke again. "Your Majesty, what of the child? The boy will complicate matters of succession. We need clarity on his status. Thomas will be legitimized and given a title, but he will not be in the line of succession," Edmund said firmly. "Any children I have with Lady Rosalind will be my heirs. Thomas will be raised as a nobleman, with all the education and opportunities that entails, but there will be no question about the succession. Is that clear enough?" The council members looked at each other, engaging in silent communication through glances and subtle gestures. Finally, the Lord Chancellor spoke for the group. "Your Majesty, if you're determined to pursue this course, then we will support you. Lady Rosalind's restoration to her rightful inheritance can be accomplished relatively quickly. The evidence against Lord Thornfield is compelling, and few will object to seeing justice done for Lord James's daughter. As for the marriage itself, we would counsel you to proceed carefully. Court the lady properly, allow time for the realm to become accustomed to the idea, and then make your formal announcement." "How much time?" Edmund asked. 6 months, the Archbishop suggested. "Long enough for Lady Rosalind to fully recover from her ordeal, for the legal matters regarding her estates to be resolved, and for the court to see her as a respected lady rather than simply a victim you rescued. Then, if you're both still certain of your feelings, you can announce your betrothal with the council's full support." Edmund considered this. 6 months seemed like an eternity, when all he wanted was to claim Rosalind as his own immediately, to announce to the world that she was under his protection, not just as a king, but as a man who loved her. But he also recognized the wisdom in the Archbishop's counsel. Rosalind needed time to heal, to adjust to her new circumstances, to be certain that her feelings for him were based on genuine affection rather than gratitude or dependence. "Very well," he agreed. 6 months. "But during that time I expect Lady Rosalind to be treated with the utmost respect by everyone at court. Anyone who speaks ill of her or questions her character will answer to me personally. Is that understood?" The council members nodded in unison, recognizing the steel in their king's voice. They might have concerns about the political wisdom of his choice, but none of them doubted his determination or his ability to make good on his threats. After the meeting concluded, Edmund went immediately to find Rosalind. He found her in the palace gardens, sitting on a stone bench while Thomas slept in a basket beside her. She was reading the book he had given her, but she looked up with a smile when she heard his approach. "How did it go?" she asked, though her expression suggested she was bracing for bad news. Edmund sat beside her and took her hand. "Better than I expected, actually. They've agreed to support us, though they've counseled patience. 6 months, Rosalind. In 6 months, if we're both still certain, I'll announce our betrothal with the council's blessing." Rosalind's eyes widened with a mixture of joy and disbelief. "They agreed? Truly? I was so afraid they would forbid it, would force you to choose between me and your responsibilities as king. I would have chosen you," Edmund said simply. "But fortunately, it won't come to that. There are conditions, of course. We need to restore your lands first, to establish your status as a lady in your own right. We need to give the court time to accept you. But the path forward is clear, Rosalind. We can have a future together." She threw her arms around him, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "I can't believe this is real. 6 months ago I was in a dungeon, convinced I would die there. Now I'm sitting in a palace garden, being told that I might become a queen. It's like a fairy tale." "It's not a fairy tale," Edmund said, holding her close. "It's real life, and it won't always be easy. There will be challenges, people who question our relationship, political complications, but we'll face them together, Rosalind. I promise you that." Over the following months, everything Edmund had promised began to come to fruition. The investigation into the Thornfield crimes concluded with overwhelming evidence of wrongdoing. The current Lord Thornfield was arrested and tried, ultimately stripped of his title and the Merrick lands. The estates were formally restored to Rosalind, making her once again a wealthy and influential member of the nobility. Rosalind threw herself into managing her restored properties with the intelligence and dedication her father had instilled in her. She proved to be an excellent administrator, working with stewards to repair years of neglect and to restore the Merrick lands to their former prosperity. The people who lived on those lands, many of whom remembered her father, welcomed her return with genuine joy. She also began to establish herself at court, attending functions and social gatherings, gradually winning over the nobles who had initially been skeptical. Her intelligence, her compassion, and her grace impressed even those who had been prepared to dismiss her as an unsuitable match for their king. Stories of her survival and resilience spread, and she became something of a symbol of strength in adversity. Edmund courted her properly, as the archbishop had counseled. They spent time together in public settings, attending court functions, walking in the gardens, dining with other nobles. But they also carved out private moments, evenings spent in the library discussing books and ideas, quiet conversations in the gardens while Thomas played nearby, stolen kisses in shadowed corridors when no one was watching. Thomas thrived in his new environment, growing from a fragile infant into a healthy, happy baby. Edmund found himself genuinely attached to the child, holding him during evening visits, making silly faces that earned delighted giggles, taking joy in watching him reach developmental milestones. The boy would never replace the children Edmund hoped to have with Rosalind, but he loved Thomas for his own sake and for the joy he brought to Rosalind's life. As the 6-month mark approached, Edmund knew with absolute certainty that his feelings for Rosalind had only deepened. She was everything he had thought and more: wise, compassionate, strong, and capable. She would make an extraordinary queen, and more importantly, she made him happy in ways he had never thought possible. On the evening before he planned to make the formal announcement of their betrothal, Edmund arranged a private dinner in the palace gardens. Lanterns had been hung among the trees, creating a soft, romantic glow. A table had been set with fine linens and the best food the palace kitchens could produce. Musicians played softly in the background, their melodies drifting on the evening breeze. Rosalind arrived wearing a gown of deep emerald green that made her eyes shine like jewels. Her auburn hair was arranged in an elaborate style that showcased her elegant neck, and she wore the Merrick family jewels that had been recovered from the Thornfield estates, a necklace of emeralds and gold that had belonged to her mother. "You look breathtaking," Edmund said, taking her hands and kissing them. "Though you always do." "Flatterer," Rosalind said with a laugh, though her cheeks colored with pleasure. "This is beautiful, Edmund. What's the occasion?" "Tomorrow, I'm going to announce our betrothal to the court, Edmund said, watching her face carefully. But before I do that, before it becomes official and public, I wanted to ask you properly, privately. Rosalind Merrick, will you marry me? Will you become my queen, my partner, my wife? Will you share your life with me, face whatever challenges come with me, build a future together? Rosalind's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling radiantly. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, Edmund, I'll marry you. I love you more than I ever thought possible to love anyone. You've given me back my life, my hope, my ability to trust and feel joy. Spending the rest of my life with you would be the greatest honor and the greatest happiness I could imagine. Edmund pulled out a ring, a beautiful piece with a large emerald surrounded by smaller diamonds, set in gold. This was my mother's, he said as he slipped it onto Rosalind's finger. My father gave it to her when they became betrothed. She would have loved you, Rosalind. She would have been so happy to know that her son found someone who makes him as happy as she made my father. Rosalind looked at the ring through her tears, then threw her arms around Edmund, kissing him with all the love and passion that had been building over the past 6 months. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and grinning like young lovers rather than mature adults planning a royal wedding. They dined and talked long into the night, making plans for their wedding, discussing their hopes for the future, imagining the children they would have and the life they would build together. And when the evening finally ended and Edmund escorted Rosalind back to her chambers, they parted with a kiss that was full of promise for all the tomorrows to come. The next day, Edmund stood before his assembled court and made the formal announcement. Lords and ladies, I have news that brings me great joy. Lady Rosalind Merrick has done me the honor of agreeing to become my wife and your queen. We will be married in 3 months' time, and I hope you will all join me in celebrating this union. The court erupted in applause and cheers. There were some surprised faces, some who had doubted this day would come, but the overwhelming response was positive. Rosalind stood beside Edmund, her hand in his, her face radiant with happiness, and he knew that they had overcome every obstacle that had stood between them. In the months that followed, preparations for the royal wedding consumed the palace, but amid all the planning and ceremony, Edmund and Rosalind found moments of quiet happiness, moments that reminded them why they had fought so hard to be together. And when the wedding day finally arrived, when Rosalind walked down the aisle in a gown of white silk embroidered with silver thread, when they spoke their vows before the archbishop and all the assembled nobles of the realm, Edmund knew that he had found something more precious than any crown. A true partner, a genuine love, a woman who would stand beside him through whatever challenges the future might bring. As they emerged from the cathedral to the cheers of the crowd, as they rode through the city in an open carriage while people threw flowers and shouted blessings, Rosalind leaned close to Edmund and whispered, "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me a future I never dared to dream of." Edmund squeezed her hand and smiled. "Thank you for surviving. Thank you for being brave enough to trust again. Thank you for choosing me, despite everything you'd been through. I love you, Rosalind. Today, tomorrow, and for all the years to come." And so the woman who had been found in a dungeon nursing her son became a queen, beloved by her king and respected by her people. The boy born in captivity grew up as a prince of the realm, given every advantage and opportunity, never knowing anything but love and security. And the king who had thought duty and political necessity would define his life discovered that sometimes the most important decisions are the ones made with the heart rather than the head. Their story became legend throughout the kingdom, a tale of survival and redemption, of love triumphing over adversity, of justice finally prevailing after years of wrong. And in the years that followed, Queen Rosalind proved to be everything Edmund had believed she would be: wise, compassionate, strong, and dedicated to using her power to protect those who could not protect themselves. Together, they ruled with justice and mercy, and their love remained as strong on their last day together as it had been on their first.